Before I start this video, I first want to talk a little bit about the video itself. You've probably already noticed that the word retrospective has a few extra letters in it. That's not a typo, it is React-Trospective, and there's a good reason for me breaking from my usual formula of doing normal retrospectives. You see, normally when I cover a show, it's a show that I've seen before. You can't really look back on something if you're watching it for the first time. So that raises the question, why bother with this show at all if I can't cover it accurately? It fits in with the big three on Disney, Gravity Falls, Owl House, and Amphibia, of which I've already covered the first two. I want to cover Amphibia, but I can't do a retrospective of it, and it would be dishonest to watch the show for the first time and then try and act like I'm an expert. A reaction video would be me recording myself as I watch it, and then most likely realizing that I wasn't energetic enough to make good content, and then re-recording it, except I crack pre-scripted jokes and overreact to things that aren't especially shocking, and basically it would be very ungenuine, and I am sorry if this is how you find out most YouTubers are faking it. So I'm not going to act like an expert on the show, nor will I create some sort of persona where I pretend it's my first day on planet Earth and I'm wowed by everything. I will watch the show, and then write down what I thought about each episode, and record myself reading that. I will try to do very little editing, and I might end up contradicting myself a few times, but hopefully I wind up doing the best of both ends of the spectrum between long-form, high-effort retrospectives and long-form, low-effort reaction videos. And to really drive home this latter format, I am going to bring out this guy. It's the dog-worm thing that I use as an avatar. It'll be my rant-sona, but don't worry, I don't have arms to smugly cross with one eyebrow raised. So this intro section didn't really set anything up about the show because I know very little about the show other than random bits of spoilers that have appeared in various parts of the internet that I use that are adjacent to the Amphibia fandom. Considering I've already reviewed both Gravity Falls and the Owl House, this is actually quite a bit more than average. I'd like to do a content warning or something here, but like I said, I haven't seen the show, so I don't really know if there are like talking dogs or whatever in it that people are going to be upset by. It's from Disney, so I doubt it will be, but I'm assuming you're at least familiar with Amphibia if you're watching this video, so you should know what to expect. So without any further stalling, let's get right into it. Anne or Beast? In order to prove to Hop Pop that he's more responsible than his baby sister Poppy, Sprig heads into the woods to investigate rumors of a monster lurking there, who's been attacking the townsfolk. He's quickly caught in a trap by a human girl named Anne, though when a real monster roars nearby, Anne frees Sprig, which convinces him she isn't so bad. But the rest of the townsfolk, gathered into an angry mob by Mayor Toadstool, catch this duo with the human before they also meet the real monster, a giant mantis. In an inversion of the earlier situation, Sprig frees Anne, and she proceeds to defend him against the mantis as the two tie it up together. Sprig also defends Anne against the angry mob, who agree to allow this monster to stay with the Plantar family. Anne settles down in their basement as she pleads with a chest from the opening theme to return her home, to no success. Best Fronds. Starting with a flashback to Anne stealing the chest from the opening title, the episode then begins on Sprig comforting Anne in her basement room as the rest of the family is slowly convinced she isn't a monster. But as the rest of the townsfolk may not see it this way, Hop Pop puts them on lockdown and orders Anne and Sprig to play inside. Anne convinces Sprig to take advantage of his sleeping to steal the house key and go to the lake, claiming that that's what friends do, enable each other. Once at the lake, they ignore a "don't swim" sign to enjoy themselves before a giant snake emerges from the water, threatening to eat them. As Anne is a weak swimmer, she insists that Sprig leave her behind, but he doubles back and allows the snake to eat him. Anne doesn't get many time to warn him before the snake spits him out because he kept a few of Hop Pop's peppers on him, too spicy for the monster to handle, before these new friends return home, acting as though they never left. The end of the episode shows an imprisoned Sasha being interrogated by a figure over Anne's missing shoe, proof there must be more people like her around. The decision to start the show not from the main character's point of view, but from that of a character more familiar with the setting is an interesting one, but one that's justified in the second half of this episode, as we start to see the flaws with Anne's character. She is easily pressured into committing some petty theft by her friends, then she pressures Sprig into misbehaving so they can have fun instead of doing something more sensible. Anne's first foray into society did see her attacked by an angry mob after all. Generally, you want a story to begin with a likable character whose journey you want to follow and whose goals you can root for. But this goes contrary to character development, where the audience watches a flawed character work through these flaws to become a better person. So Anne might be the main character, but since Sprig is more immediately likable, we focus on his wants and his family first. This, in turn, makes Anne feel like more of an outsider, as she's introduced as a new quantity in the world, rather than Amphibia being seen from the point of view of an outsider. Cane Crazy. Anne insults Hop Pop's cooking, who reacts by threatening to kick her out. While doing an impression of the old man, she accidentally breaks his heirloom cane, and, worried she might really be kicked out, she recruits the others in repairing it. So they ask a woodworker, Leopold Loggle, if he can fix it, and he can not fix it, though he does point them to a doom tree where they can find the wood for a replacement cane. Anne takes a picture of his map on her phone and they head out, finding this tree and removing a branch, only for the tree to be revealed as a giant stick bug that chases them back to the shop. The doom tree wrecks up the place for a while until Anne throws a jar of termites who eat it down to a squishy form. Leopold ends up taking both the cane and Anne's old clicky pen as payment for the damages to his store, and they return home empty-handed. But Hop Pop doesn't actually kick Anne out, saying it was just a bluff to make her respect him more, and that she reminds him of himself at her age. Flood, Sweat, and Tears. A leak in the basement floods Anne's bedroom, so she and Sprig decide to become roommates despite Hop Pop's warnings that it might strain their friendship. They ignore this warning and proceed to have fun staying up at night with pillow fights and would-you-rather questions, though each of their habits starts to wear out the other one. They disagree on the temperature and humidity, because frogs can't sweat. They disagree on how much sleep to get, as Anne stays up too late. And they disagree on whether Sprig's figurines are dolls or action figures. Eventually, they're both fed up with one another, so they head to the basement to search for and fix the leak, finding 2 giant lampreys instead. Anne and Sprig are pulled underwater before seeing Anne's old bed float by, where they work together to defeat the river monsters with a pillow fight. These monsters flee, and Hop Pop investigates the noise, hearing the 2 discussing each other's flaws before he points out that the 2 actually discussing their issues is what makes good friends. Not that they can get along without any issues. The conflicts in these episodes come down to arguments Anne is having with the Plantar family, things that are an inevitability when it comes to spending a long amount of time with anyone, family or not. And while the Plantars aren't technically Anne's family, it's clear that this isn't going to be a major focus in the near future as the found family trope comes into play. We're 3 episodes in and they're already bickering like a father and child. Also fighting are Anne and Sprig, who are basically siblings at this point, as they both feed into one another's feedback loops of misbehavior. They assume staying up all night and playing around will be fun, but one of the 2 still needs to be the responsible one, and the distance they occasionally feel is vital to this continued coexistence. Being friends with somebody and being family with somebody are 2 different things, and Anne is, at this point, not really either one, which can have both its strengths and weaknesses. An episode back, there was a scene that recreated a shot from the opening theme, one where we see a friend of Anne's captured as a prisoner in a castle. Anne's journey of wanting to make it home is something she cannot do because there's bad weather or something like that, blocking anyone from coming or going, which feels like a plot device to force her to stay put, while allowing for the writers to focus on world building and character introductions without a sense of tonal whiplash, where it feels like Anne doesn't actually want anything anymore because she's forgotten her motivations, rather than the girl making the best of her time during a bad situation. Hop Luck. The Plantars are planning for the annual Wartwood potluck, trying to make a dish that won't get in last place, where they'll be placed into the shame cage once again. Anne convinces them to ignore their old family recipe book to make something more modern, a pizza. Pizza ingredients are hard to come by in Amphibia, and they wind up promising Sprig's hand in marriage to the baker's daughter, wrangling caterpillars for cheese, and attempting to retrieve tomatoes from giant carnivorous tomato plants. These plants end up eating the family, with the ingredients being digested as they're stuck in the monster's throat. But at Anne's suggestion, she asked for a traditional way to escape, where they learn the entire plant's neck is edible. After eating their way out, they realize the potluck is about to happen, so they submit one of Hop Pop's traditional dishes, garnished with a bit of tomato. This winds up being the best dish they've ever submitted. It still gets last place though, and Anne is happy to join them in the shame cage. Stakeout. Sprig steals the family's corn to set up a fake stakeout for Anne and Hop Pop to get them to stop arguing about Anne's home and Hop Pop's nostalgia. This plan works to get them to sympathize for a bit, before they start trying to one-up one another again, eventually showing off drinks to keep them awake that they swap when arguing they're too intense for the other one. So Sprig decides to steal more corn to force them to stay out a second night, though the hallucinating Anne and Hop Pop catch him in the act and begin blasting him with lasers. Imaginary lasers. When these don't work, the duo tries attacking the corn thief with weapons, chasing Sprig to the house where his pleading finally has them realize his identity. Hop Pop and Anne both realize that they were defending each other during the attack, and they learn to respect one another before falling asleep. So a bit of irony I've picked up on is that Anne wants to go back home and Hop Pop wants the exact same thing. The only difference between the two characters is what they define as back home, as Hop Pop is far closer physically, but far less likely to get what he wants due to the passage of time being what separates him, rather than some sort of magic box. In some ways, this conflict manifests itself as a cultural exchange. Anne teaches the Plantar family about pizza, a human delicacy, or Anne trades weird drinks with Hop Pop while the two are on a stakeout, once again getting to try something of the others' and learning a little bit not only about their taste, but the context behind that taste. When Anne starts tripping, she, lampshaded and out of character, points out that her unique physiology has caused an unusual reaction from the gourd Hop Pop had with them. She is grossed out by their food even though no one else has a problem with it. A human girl in a frog's world does raise a series of understandable conflicts about the basic differences between not only their cultures, but physical bodies. Although, the citizens of Amphibia have sort of a crazy frog thing going on, so the differences are only as extensive as is necessary to make the plots more interesting. I realize maybe Crazy Frog is a bit too old of a reference for some of my viewers. If you don't know what Crazy Frog is, look it up right now. Seriously, pause this video and open up a new tab and look it up, and when you get back, you'll have a new counter-argument every time someone says that culture used to be better. Just compare this show about frogs to the millennial viral frog thing, and enjoy how good you have it. Additionally, for context of how much spoilers I kind of know going forward, when Anne's hair turns blue during this episode, I kind of know what that's foreshadowing. Or rather, I know that is foreshadowing something. The Domino Effect. Anne finds and rescues a caterpillar who resembles her cat Domino from back home and names it Domino 2. She and Sprig have to keep this pet a secret from Hop Pop, who's still upset about their last pet, Charlie Bigbottom, and the fact that he was the one who had to clean up after it. Over the next day, Domino 2 proceeds to tear up the house and leave scratches all over Anne's face, which she tolerates by saying the caterpillar just has to spend some more time adjusting. Later, the caterpillar undergoes metamorphosis and becomes a giant kill-a-moth, toying with the frogs and preparing to eat them. Anne lures Domino 2 away with its old toy and gets chased to a cliff, throwing the toy away as the moth chases after. When she returns home to apologize for nearly getting the plantars eaten, Hop Pop admits he understands how Anne felt because he misses Charlie Bigbottom. Taking charge. Anne introduces the Plantars to Suspicion Island, a show she has on her phone that they all spend the next day binge-watching. But the next morning, Anne discovers that her phone's battery is dead as someone stayed up all night watching every episode. They start to grow suspicious of one another, though Anne just wants to recharge her phone, something Hop Pop says they can do by finding a Zapapede in the mountains. They head out, wary of who might have used up Anne's battery along the way, and accusing each other of having done it, their fight breaking a bridge and causing them to plummet. Eventually, Hop Pop confesses that it was him, despite claiming to have hated the show, and he makes up for it by diving into a nest of Zapopedes and getting electrocuted. The others have to work together to save him, getting shocked themselves and blasting off into the sky. Anne's phone ends up charged to 10,000%, and they all agree to stop fighting to watch the rest of Suspicion Island together. Did Anne ever eat Hop Pop's hot chips? If so, now that she's charged her phone, she's basically hit all the hot girl summer tropes. More seriously, Anne's phone holding a charge for a suspiciously long number of episodes was something that was addressed here, being the thing that tied her to her old memories. So having it boosted to well over 100% of its max charge is kind of a hand-wavy way of saying to the audience not to ask questions if the answer to the question is boring. The appeal of Amphibia comes from the fish-out-of-water dynamics of its characters, with Anne's modern tech and human values against the rural amphibian lifestyle of her new family. I'm not doing like a frog-out-of-water pun, that's too low-hanging. And as much as Anne is starting to find some of her old joys in the world of Amphibia, such as small creatures who resemble her old pets, the Plantars are able to find joys in binge-watching television from her world. Each ideal can learn from those around them, as they change their tastes to adapt to what their loved ones like to do. This doesn't always turn out great. Maybe the fuzzy caterpillar's a horrifying frog-eating monster, and maybe the basement flooding doesn't actually lead to a weeks-long sleepover. But ultimately, these problems are solved the same way any other problem is solved, with a little bit of communication. Not getting along with your siblings, or somebody watching ahead on a TV show, are both such mundane problems that can exist as plots alongside hallucinating from gourd tea, or being chased by a tree monster. Anne Theft Auto. Anne wants to take Bessie, the Plantar's giant snail, out for a drive, but Hop Pop insists that she read the manual on Bessie's history first. She ignores this to go off-roading with Sprig instead, though they wind up stranded in the woods, with Bessie refusing to leave her shell. Sprig seeks help, getting a slow ride from Miss Croaker, who he had previously met in a road rage incident, as Anne stays behind, eventually reading through the manual because she has nothing else to do. She winds up getting invested in this story, learning several chapters in that Bessie hides in her shell when predators are nearby, and how to coax her back out to escape. She and Sprig make it home, where Anne reveals she's read the whole book, but she rejects Hop Pop's offer to get some proper experience. Breakout Star. Anne has an acne breakout and wants to hide her face, though Hop Pop makes her work the family's market stand anyway. Once her acne is revealed to the town of Wartwood, the frogs there think she's covered in warts, and Anne is quickly made famous for that. Mayor Toadstool, down in the polls, sees this popularity and bribes Anne to support him publicly, with a lavish apartment and snail rides, with Anne quickly forgetting about the Plantars. But the next day, her acne is clear, and Anne has to ask the Plantars for help to fake pimples with swamp berries. She makes it to an assembly, where Toadstool requests that she disavow her old family, as they're a bad look for her. And Anne reacts by coming clean, literally cleaning off her face. Mayor Toadstool is chased off as Anne decides to let the Plantars enjoy her nice things before the locks are changed. Anne finally gets access to the family car equivalent, and like anyone growing up in a rural area knows, this means she finally gets to participate in society because she can at last travel freely. This also marks a minor shift in the narrative, as more and more of Wartwood gets introduced beyond an incarnation as faces of an angry mob. And what better way to start this series of introductions than with Bessie, who has been here the whole time. Rather than viewing Bessie as a method of transportation, Anne starts to view her as a living creature, which makes sense as she's talking to anthropomorphic frogs who can understand her, so it's not as if showing a bit of affection towards a large snail is a pointless endeavor. The following episode then has Anne leave the house while not attracting the usual negative attention she is used to. Once she starts breaking out, the other frogs start to believe she's covered in warts, and, being frogs, this makes her enough like them to finally start to shower her with praise. This big jump in how she is treated goes straight to her head, in a plot that's pretty typical for a kid's show. It's better to use a more familiar plotline when making a large number of character introductions at once. Mayor Toadstool is a character who's been foreshadowed in signs around Wartwood before, as well as having led the mob against her in the first episode. I like that his toady is literally named Toady. That's a neat detail. I've also realized he is a toad, while most of the rest of Wartwood is frogs. I tried to see if there was any other indicator to tell frogs and toads apart in universe without looking things up and risking a bunch of spoilers, but I only found the phrase, "not all frogs are toads, but all toads are frogs," which only added to my confusion as to whether there's some sort of racial allegory at play here. I might just be looking too far into a lack of toad puns, though. Sprig versus Hop Pop. When Sprig finds out his suggestions for the farm are being burned, he challenges Hop Pop to a sumo match for ownership of the farm. To everybody's surprise, Sprig wins, and he immediately starts incorporating Anne and Polly's suggestions into the workplace. But they quickly run out of food and other things begin falling apart, prompting Anne to go behind Sprig's back to search for Hop Pop for help. Hop Pop has been living with a group of beetles in the cemetery after helping a beetle named Jeremy, though he agrees to return when he finds out Sprig's been using his bed. During the rematch, Hop Pop tells Sprig that he's learned the value of coordination from the beetles, and Sprig voluntarily surrenders, returning ownership to Hop Pop, who now reads the suggestions before burning them. Girl time. While observing Polly playing along with the Plantars' disgusting spitting habits, Anne decides to take her out for some girl time. She takes Hop Pop's wallet and heads to a spa, a salon, and a clothing store, before ending up at a tea shop, though Polly still shows some resistance to doing feminine things. So at the advice of Felicia, they go to a massage parlor, where the masseuse/bounty hunter working there gives Anne a full-body massage. But Polly sneaks out to spit with the local vagrant, and Anne finally tells her off for being gross. Meanwhile, the rest of the town has arrested the Plantars because of Anne spending the fake IOUs from Hop Pop's wallet, and they're forced to do manual labor to pay the town back. But seeing a golden spitting trophy in the middle of town, Anne gets the idea to have Polly beat the spitting record to win this trophy. She fails at first because she feels self-conscious about Anne's rant from before, but after Anne apologizes, Polly is able to beat the old record, and the Plantars use the trophy to pay off their debt. Polly feels like less of a character and more of a collection of one-liners thus far. She doesn't really have the same familial dynamics of Sprig and Anne, or of Hop Pop and Anne, and she doesn't feel nearly as fleshed out as other characters, hardly contributing to plots thus far. So having Anne attempt to spend some girl time with her is a way to turn a less developed character into someone with more of a connection to the ongoing dynamics. I mean, it's a little bit weird we got an episode fleshing out Bessie before Polly, but I digress. Eventually it's better than never. Polly herself is then established in relation to the other characters around her, being the only girl of the Plantar family and picking up several of the less feminine habits that her brother has. Anne was shown early on to be close to two other girls, in Marcy and Sasha, so being thrust into a world of frogs is also her being thrust into a world of men. But the episode also goes out of its way to point out the flaws in that logic. She's not in a world of men or women, but frogs. People like some things, and they dislike others, and a person's froggy gender doesn't really play into it very much. Actually, now that I think of it, do amphibians even have sexual diversions in the tadpole stage? A cursory lookup doesn't even seem to indicate that they do, and external features don't really occur until after the tadpole stage, so especially for frogs like Polly, there is no difference physical or social. I don't want to spoil too much for myself, so my research at this stage of writing the script is looking up stuff on real frogs. Dating season. Sprig is attacked in the woods by a childhood friend, Ivy, and Anne starts to suspect he has a crush on her. When she tells Hop Pop, he prepares a courtship ritual for the two, getting Ivy's mother Felicia to go along with this arrangement by offering Sprig as labor for her shop, while Hop Pop gets some proprietary seeds. At the Firefly Festival, the two awkwardly make small talk before learning they're only there at their family's behest, and they leave to go watch the fireflies together. Anne believes this is a good sign, as per her magazines, but Hop Pop and Felicia leave to force the couple to come back and finish this ceremony. But they're grabbed by carnivorous love doves before they can reach the others, So Ivy and Sprig team up together to rescue them with an ambush, the same kind of ambush Ivy had been doing to Sprig since the start of the episode. Once freed, the adults realize it was unfair to pressure their children, as Sprig agrees he's developed real feelings for Ivy. Anne versus Wild. The Plantars leave without Anne for a camping trip, though she insists they bring her along in spite of her dislike of camping, because she doesn't want to be left out. They arrive at Flemington Campground, where Anne repeatedly fails at anything outdoorsy, but instead of admitting she is having a bad time, she doubles down and asks for a more intense experience. A frog named Soggy Joe bursts out of a bush and offers to take them to a more dangerous campsite, leading Anne, who leads the family, to a secluded spot in the woods, where he tells them all about frog-eating mudmen. He's then hit from behind with an axe, collapsing as the mudmen surround the Plantars. They try to fight back with torches, light being one of their weaknesses, but this doesn't work, so Anne uses a bath bomb from her bag, cleanliness being their other weakness. This reveals the mudmen as regular frogs, and they slink into the night. Anne admits she was lying about her love of the outdoors, and they agree to invite her to places in the future even if she doesn't want to go. When the Plantars arrive home, Anne finally gathers them to show off the thing that brought her to that world, unveiling the music box she stole before. Hopediah returns to his study, where he looks up this box and discovers it is the Calamity Box, which was presumed destroyed. The first part started to introduce a bit of shipping discourse to the show, openly referencing not only earlier episodes like Hop Luck, where Sprig was engaged, but also having Anne use exact terms and theory-crafting couple names for Sprig and Ivy. I can see episode titles in advance, and I see Sprivy down there, and I'm just now piecing together that that probably is Sprivy and, doesn't rhyme with privy. Anyway, shipping discourse is typically something that I never really bothered to engage in fandoms, even in series that I have become obsessed with. Even in franchises like Fire Emblem, where that sort of thing is actively encouraged, I still tend to go with whatever happens naturally. So I'm not going to include a whole section on shipping and the potential around that, because I'm not a guy who's qualified to do that. I am, however, qualified to talk about the fact that Anne finally accepts she's never going to be one of the Plantars, at least not in the physical sense. Frogs and humans are too different, and as much as she tries to fake otherwise, she just doesn't like the outdoors the way they do, eating bugs and being covered in mud and so on. But the moral at the end of the episode is that she doesn't have to be exactly like them to be liked and accepted. They can still respect a human even if she's not a frog. And it is this acceptance regardless of context that finally makes her comfortable enough to show off the Calamity Box, and to formally recruit their help in researching a way to get back home, something she can do now that she has a home. Contagi-Anne. Anne fakes an illness to stay inside on a rainy day, with the Plantars working outdoor and then returning ill. Anne attempts to take care of them while still trying to fake that she is sick, managing their symptoms and cooking for them. But Hop Pop starts to turn red, with his medical book saying it's a disease called red leg, that's fatal unless they can soak in a particular mineral spring. So Anne gathers them up on Bessie and rides to a mountain, eventually carting them up herself when Bessie's too slow. Despite struggling with the stairs being made for frogs, they eventually make it to the peak, only for the water to have no effect. Anne breaks down and admits she faked her illness, only for Hop Pop to check his book again and realize that a mushroom Anne included in her soup had merely dyed their skin red. Family Shrub. Hop Pop is working on the family shrub, like a family tree, but isn't keeping the kids' interest, least of all Anne, who's not even a planter. Hop Pop leaves to get more glue for their crafts, ending up at a store where he winds up knocking down the display and then getting covered in glue, as well as covered in local. While he's gone, Sprig accidentally discovers a hidden passageway in the house that leads to a laboratory, where they get chased by a giant pumpkin, an armory where they have to fight through a gauntlet, and a storage room full of games gathered by Emma the Newt, who was an honorary planter despite not being related. When Hop Pop returns from his glue gathering, he finds that the others are now fascinated by their family history, including Anne, the other honorary planter. Anne, forgetting the previous episode, declares herself uninterested in the Plantar family's history due to not being one of them, citing a lack of a blood relation as her reason for not going along with their history lesson. But another part of her reasoning is that she has little interest in learning about a bunch of farmers doing farmer stuff. Funnily enough, this is the same reason that Sprig and Polly don't care either. They're bored by their own history, making Anne's disinterest in the subject something that makes her fit in even better. Also making her fit in is the fact that, once underground, the trio of kids finds 3 rooms, each of which requires their particular skills. Sprig is able to tame the giant pumpkin by showing it a bit of affection so it lowers its guard enough to be kicked away. Polly is able to clear the obstacle course by charging in violently like she always does. And Anne uses her video game knowledge to clear the puzzles collected by a newt who was unrelated to the rest of the family, again, only by blood. The sick plot has Anne avoiding responsibility by lying about her condition, only for this lie to get bigger and bigger as she tries to help the others, eventually forgetting to fake that she's ill. This is a common enough plot in sitcoms and the like that one would expect the next logical step to be taken of the family getting mad at her for lying and Anne having to earn their trust back. But instead, she earns their trust during the lie, by acting in a way that would have been selfless even if she was in perfect health. It's an inversion of typical tropes that only works if the family actually likes each other, a statement that the Plantars have earned. Lily Pad Tie. After destroying the family's pizza, the Plantars go to Stumpy's diner to eat instead, where they see an obnoxious food critic named Albus Duckweed, who threatens to shut the place down with a bad review. But because Anne has worked in food service before, she's convinced she can turn Stumpy's around, and she helps the restaurant owner clean up the place and revamp the menu. Wart is impressed at the new vibe to the diner, except for Duckweed, who's still intent on writing his bad review. So Anne and Stumpy work together to make a Kraken dish that will wow him, but this Kraken ends up attacking the restaurant instead, with the duo having to fight it into submission. Despite the fight, Duckweed enjoyed his experience and gives Stumpy's a positive review on the message board. A literal board. Plantar's Last Stand. After the mayor implements a tax hike, the Plantars have to get creative to save their stand at the farmer's market. Anne uses the remains of a gourd to create Plantar's Potion, then convinces Hop Pop to embellish the effects of the potion to sell it to Wartwood. Because the Plantars have a reputation for being honest, the townsfolk believe him, and the potions sell well, until they run out of ingredients, and Hop Pop resorts to using compost and garbage to make new batches. These batches sell on the popularity of the previous day's sales until Miss Croaker, their most loyal customer, decides to buy a bottle. The guilt gets to Hop Pop and he slaps the bottle out of her hand, admitting his fault, though giant flies grab the kids and carry them away before he can rightfully apologize. Hop Pop lures the flies away by rolling the barrel off a cliff, and he saves the day, returning the money he scammed from Wartwood, only to lose his stand immediately afterwards. The family tries to stay positive, though Hop Pop realizes he's unemployed. Anne reveals hidden depths in her ability to run and maintain a restaurant based on her experience working with her parents. Hop Pop reveals he has hidden depths in his ability to use a bit of showmanship to sell a product, though the similarities between these two parts end there, as Anne's attempts to save Stumpy's are successful, while Hop Pop's were more successful, though not treated as such by the narrative. In Wartwood, there's a value placed on honesty because it's a small town. By this point, the miscellaneous background characters can be quickly identified either as such or by name. To rip off a stranger before skipping town is one thing, but to know the name of the person you're profiting off of changes the dynamics a bit to where even greed loses out against familiarity. But it's not as though greed was a major reason for the dynamics in these 2 episodes. Anne was just helping a diner's owner to keep his store open, while Hop Pop just wanted to keep the family business afloat. The only reason these plots were started was because an outside force placed pressure onto the business owners, and while Anne helping out a restaurant was selfishly motivated, she just wanted to stick it to a skinny alien from Lilo and Stitch, the end result was good all around, and it gets a pass. Hop Pop, in the same sense, was also motivated by a good reason, and merely took it too far. Toad tax. Anne still hasn't received any respect from Wartwood, so when a group of toads arrive to work as debt collectors, she joins up with them with the hope of earning a bit of respect by being deputized. The toads then produce a list provided by the mayor, a list of tax cheats, with these toads ransacking multiple houses to pay for the missing money. But Anne is confused as she's confident these frogs have paid their taxes, sneaking a few personal effects out of the tax heap to return to the citizens of Wartwood. Once the toads reach the Plantar family farm, she finally stands up to them, saying she knows for sure that they've paid their dues, and siding against the tax collectors. The toads prepare to attack her for betraying them, but the townsfolk rally behind Anne, defending her and scaring off these toads. Meanwhile, Sprig has been following the mayor's suspicious activity, discovering that he's been keeping the collected tax revenue inside of a statue, then lying that the townsfolk didn't pay. The toads collect their taxes from Toadstool, and Anne is treated as a hero by Wartwood. Prison Break. Captain Grime is struggling to get his soldiers in functioning order as they lack discipline to maintain their fort. He's also struggling with the imprisoned Sasha, who keeps manipulating the guards watching her cell into quitting. He's about to interrogate her when the tower is attacked by two giant herons, attracted by a recently retired toad's noise. They begin to attack the tower, with the toads retreating underground as Sasha works with Grime to injure one of the birds. He tries to rally the troops into a counterattack, but they're too scared to fight, so Sasha recommends using positive reinforcement to convince the soldiers that they're valuable, complimenting a few and telling Grime to compliment them too. This works, and the soldiers launch their attack, driving away the birds and showing a much larger degree of loyalty and unity during the fight. As Grime is impressed with Sasha, he agrees to allow her provisions and the ability to go free, but he also points to the herons as proof that the outside world isn't safe enough to travel alone. Sasha agrees to stay and serve as his lieutenant instead, promising her friends she'll still look for them. I'm aware that if Amphibia were to be an episodic show for the rest of its runtime, people wouldn't give it the amount of praise it receives, to the point that it would be on my radar to be recommended for a review. So knowing this, I was aware that eventually Amphibia would need to start reintroducing plot elements back into the series. The smartest way to do this is by introducing and reintroducing these elements slowly. Episode 2 has a warning that not everyone has had the same experience in Amphibia as Anne, and this episode is a reminder that the idyllic countryside town of Wartwood doesn't reflect all of Amphibia. Or is the countryside really so idyllic? The Plantar family was quick to accept Anne as one of their own, yet after months of living there, people in Wartwood still view Anne as an outsider. On the other hand, Sasha fit in well with the toads, almost too well, as they began to respect her more than their actual leadership. She's able to manipulate them into doing her bidding in much the same way as we saw her pressuring Anne to steal the Calamity Box at the start of the show. So both of these girls were able to thrive, just at different times, as Sasha had to wait a bit longer to get the chance, while Anne got several chances and never really got the acceptance she wanted until she stopped caring about it, both in joining with the tax-collecting toads, and later by returning the pilfered goods, despite knowing the people she was helping out wouldn't have done the same for her. Grubhog Day. It's Grubhog Day, which is basically an excuse for a big fair. Hop tells Sprig that he's been volunteered for the position to watch over the Grubhog before the main event. Sprig agrees, as this is the most recent chance a Plantar has had to watch over the Grubhog since a relative messed it up years ago. Though what he really wanted to do was go on all the rides. So Anne compromises by convincing him to take the Grubhog along on rides in secret, meaning he can do both. But when the Grubhog falls out of a roller coaster and is snatched by a giant bird, Anne and Sprig have to come up with a replacement so Sprig doesn't get in trouble. They make a puppet, and Anne's puppeteering is enjoyed by the crowd, until the ceremony's about to finish, where they plan to kill the Grubhog, meaning they'll cut open Anne's hand. Sprig comes clean about the deception, and Hop forgives him as he realizes he placed too much pressure on his son. In the end, Anne and Sprig find new purpose in performing their puppet show for different crowds. Hop, and Luck. While selling produce in an alley, Hop meets with Sylvia, a woman he had a crush on years ago, though he was never able to admit this crush due to his rival Monroe always stealing attention. Since Hop is too nervous to confess to Sylvia directly, he tries to show her his feelings at an upcoming dance. But since he can't dance, he asks Anne to teach him how. She shows him a few basic dance moves over a training montage, and Hop is finally confident enough to ask for a dance, only for Monroe to ask Sylvia first. So Hop Pop challenges him to a dance-off, showing off the new moves he has, only for Monroe to beat him easily. Refusing to give up, Hop Pop decides instead to freestyle some moves, a series of bizarre movements, and these horrified the gathered audience. Except for Sylvia herself, who confesses that she always liked the weird ones, and she and Hop Pop dance together on the now empty dance floor. Since his very first introduction, Sprig has struggled with taking responsibility for himself and putting other people above his own immediate wants. And while there have been a few episodes thus far about him learning his lesson, only to immediately forget it, there's still a bit of a shift in how this lesson is approached time and time again. Here, Sprig at least tries to go along with the role he's given, watching the Grubhog, only playing on the roller coasters because he is convinced he can multitask. It's not that he's abandoning his responsibilities so much as he's prioritizing them less than he ought to. It's character growth, if only by a small amount. Hop Pop gets humanized a bit in this episode, maybe a bad choice of words, as he reveals that he's in love with another frog, just too nervous to do or say anything about it. He turns to Anne for help, not only because she is a good dancer, but because she helped out Sprig when he had a similar plot, even though her help didn't turn out for the best. Since they both supposedly learned a lesson from that experience, she is still the right teacher for expressing himself, except for when she's not. Anne tries to teach Hop Pop not to act weird with freestyle dancing, when this is the exact thing that actually made Sylvia fall in love with him. It's not as though a dance contest is going to change a person's taste after all. Civil Wart. Wartwood gathers for a theater night, only for the troupe to have been eaten on the way over. So Anne plays a movie on her phone instead, a young adult flick where a girl has to choose between two supernatural boys, Hunter and Alistair. When the movie ends on a cliffhanger, the town splits between the two options, with Sprig and Polly leading each side, while refusing reconciliation as a mirror for their own sibling conflicts. When this conflict escalates into a literal division of the town, Anne and Hop Pop attempt to get them talking. This fails, so they force a confrontation by taking each side's flag and meeting in the middle. But this meeting only erupts in fruit throwing, with Polly eventually cornered after an ambush. But when Sprig sees his side about to pelt his sister with fruit, he dives in the way and takes the hits for her, saying it's what older brothers do. After this, the town drops their fruit and returns to their normal lives, with Hop Pop saying that they do something like this about once a year. Hop Popular. Hop Pop is stewing in misery at the loss of his market stand, applying for new jobs where he can, before overhearing that the mayoral election is coming up. When complaining about Toadstool, people start to rally behind him, and soon Hop Pop finds himself in the running. The rest of the Plantars are unsure about this, knowing he'd be devastated if he loses, but he'd be happy to win, and they help him with his campaigning, most of which involves riding giant beetles, feeding giant birds, and surviving in the woods, something Hop Pop does with the help of Jeremy. Before the final match, a boxing match, Toadstool tries to convince Hop Pop to throw the fight in exchange for having his market stand back, an offer that he tells to his family that he's considering. But when the fight actually begins and he sees the people rallying behind him, Hop Pop refuses to lose on purpose, winning with a knockout the night before the election. Hop Pop gets the entire town of Wartwood to vote for him, though the toads outside of Wartwood all vote for the incumbent and Toadstool remains in charge. But Hop Pop is glad that he stood up for himself, with the episode having a happy ending as the other people in the market all pitch in to pay for his stand. Anne is an outcast among the people of Wartwood, but as the episodes go on, it starts to become clear that the rest of the Plantar family are outcasts too. It's to the point that pulling a plantar is the phrase for a huge mistake. So some sort of monster visiting the town would, of course, become the responsibility of the other outcasts of the village, as they stick together because they have to, as much as the fact that they want to. Sprig never had friends growing up. Hop Pop was always one-upped by others. The outsider family adopts the outsider human, and they proceed to stick together because they understand what it's like to not be able to do just that. But when tribalism takes over the village, people put aside their previous difference with the Plantar family to go against people with whom they have less in common. Polly and Sprig actually being able to maintain pseudo-armies of other frogs to defend ideas about which character in a fictional work is better. Hop is also able to find some sort of romance with Sylvia when he acts like himself, the weirdo outsider, as Sylvia sympathizes with the weirdo outsiders of the world, revealing herself as being one too when they dance together. But maybe Sylvia isn't the only one to secretly consider herself as different, like the Plantars. When Hop runs for mayor, he runs on the idea that the toads who have made it in society are mistreating the regular folks, and they quickly swarm to his side in this regard, as they understand they have more in common with him than they do with high society. When it comes to injustice and inequality, the only way things get close to fair is when people with things in common recognize their similarities more than their differences. Croak and punishment. Sprig finds a blue moon shell that he wants to give to Ivy for her birthday, which he leaves on the fence while the Plantars do their daily work. When they return, Anne and Sprig find the shell is missing, and Anne teaches Sprig how to do the good cop bad cop routine to help them interrogate the citizens of Wartwood so they can find it. Sprig enters people's houses, smashing up the place and accusing them of theft before eliminating enough suspects that only one frog is left, a new guy named Gunther. But Sprig's bad cop routine of smashing up his house causes this frog to fly into a rage, chasing them into Wartwood, where the citizens refuse to allow him and Anne to hide in their houses. Sprig's only able to stop the chase by apologizing and running off anyway. The two make it home where Sprig sees Ivy holding the blue moon shell, saying she saw it on the fence and took it off to be cleaned. Sprig offers her the shell, but she lets him keep it to keep on the house's door so she can see it whenever she's close. Trip to the archives. There's only 1 week until the mountain pass clears up, so Hop takes the family to the archives so they can research life outside the valley to prepare for the trip. While the rest of the family's reading, Sprig tries to get them to dive straight into an adventure instead of reading about other people's adventures, eventually stealing a lens from the sunlight-powered door to trap them inside. The Plantars are upset with him, especially when he drops it and they're really trapped. After a few failed escape attempts, Anne tries to leave through the sunroof but is trapped and swarmed by grazing cicadas. Remembering that the archives used to be a man's house, Sprig has to read about the archive's history to learn about its pipe system and find an escape, returning to the sunroof to save Anne, with Hop and Polly following. Wartwood is a society where everybody trusts each other, a place where you can leave things out without worrying that anyone will steal them. But when Anne starts to point suspicion towards imaginary people, she convinces Sprig that everything he knows about his own community is wrong, and people really are out there willing to do terrible things. Had he taken his mentality from the beginning of the episode with them through the rest of it, he would have easily been able to find out who recently took a shell to be polished, as he would have assumed that the thief had a good motivation, and they would have gone to a rock/shell expert first. But Anne convinced him not to trust his neighbors, and then his neighbors became untrustworthy. They were willing to let him into their houses before for the interrogation, but once he began to treat them like suspects by default, they started to act like it. When you treat people with suspicion, don't be surprised if they treat you the same way. And then once again, Sprig ends up getting himself and the others in trouble because he does not take things as seriously as he ought to, more or less the same plot Sprig always finds himself on this side of. What's different is the fact that Anne is not the one playing into his fantasies and enabling him, as she takes her potential route home seriously. Normally, Anne is the one who encourages and plays along with Sprig's adventures, but here she's siding with Hop that he ought to be more down to earth. Snow Day. Hyber Day is coming up. A day where all the frogs are frozen in place for 1 day, and a day that the frogs are nervous about because once a year, one of them disappears. But because Anne is warm-blooded, she volunteers to protect the town from this disappearance as they're frozen, which happens quickly. She drags all the frogs to the middle of Wartwood and starts keeping watch, but when she gets bored, she decides to thaw Sprig. Anne and a sleepy Sprig proceed to play around with the frozen bodies until noticing that Polly is gone. Sprig tracks her to a cave, and while trying to retrieve her, they're attacked by a giant weasel. While fighting this giant, Anne notices that the weasel has children it's trying to feed, and that if they take Polly, she'll condemn the babies to starvation. So she offers some of her breakfast from the start of the episode to the monster, and it accepts the food, with Polly being returned to the middle of town. While the townsfolk are praising Anne for a year without a disappearance, she confesses that she goofed around too much on the job, though the townsfolk don't really mind, until Sprig shows off all the pictures they took. Cracking Miss Croaker. Sprig is upset because everybody in town seems to like him except for Miss Sadie Croaker, who barely pays him any attention. In spite of Anne's advice to let her ignore him, Sprig breaks into her house to search for clues about what she likes, discovering a chest full of pictures of a man named Jonah. Assuming he's a long-lost lover, Sprig takes it upon himself to find Jonah on Sadie's behalf, saying that he can take him straight to her for a reunion. When Jonah arrives and finally reunites with Sadie, he pulls out a crossbow and begins to attack her, with Sadie defending herself before having her pet spider disarm the guy. Sadie says that Jonah's just a guy who doesn't like her, and Sprig admits to the break-in, with Miss Croaker finally acknowledging Sprig's attempts are worth something, only for the kid to take this as full acceptance. Whether Anne acts mature and learns from earlier lessons or not really seems to change from writer to writer. I get that Amphibia is an episodic show in its first season with only light serialization, and it's not like characters unlearning lessons for plots to work is unheard of, but it starts to get confusing when I stop being able to tell if a character is actually growing, or if they've just learned the lesson of the week a bit sooner, and whether that's going to apply the next time Anne needs to be immature or Sprig has to be irresponsible to make a lesson work in the first place. Or whether previous episodes get contradicted versus these previous episodes just being old canon. Does Sprig really have no friends, or does Ivy not count? Are the Plantars outcasts, or does everyone love Sprig? Is Hop Pop considered weird, or do people all love his market stand? And how many times does Anne have to prove herself to Wartwood before they stop viewing her like a monster, or is the fact that they still treat her as such going to be thematically relevant later on? Diversions from serialized plots make it more difficult to believe the stakes of later seasons, as if the lessons the characters are learning don't matter. And then it becomes difficult to care as a viewer is unsure if what's going on will ever be referenced again, or if the status quo will just snap back to normal. A Night at the Inn. After confirming that the valley is still frozen shut, the Plantars head back, only for Bessie to have trouble as a storm comes in. They take shelter at the nearby Dandelion Inn, run by a couple of horned bullfrogs who offer them individual rooms as they're not very booked at the moment. Polly is upset because she isn't allowed her own room, having to share with Hop Pop. But she discovers there's an adjacent room and convinces him to let her sleep on her own, only for a few creepy things around the inn to keep her up. She investigates the other rooms, only to find none of her family around, and a hooded figure chasing her. Polly discovers the bullfrogs are planning to eat the Plantar family and rushes out of a laundry chute to save them by using her bow as a boomerang. After freeing her family, they run out of the inn, with Anne leaving behind leaky vinegar and baking soda to blow up the place. Polly discovers a snail trap on Bessie, and they free the other snails the bullfrogs have been capturing before returning home. Hop Pop, seeing how independent Polly was, offers her more freedom around the house, though she, as well as Sprig and Anne, just want to bunk with Hop Pop for the evening. Wally and Anne. While foraging with the Plantars, Anne sees a man made of moss, but no one else believes her. She insists that this moss man is real, though everybody else just compares her rambling behavior to One-Eyed Wally, that frog who originally called her a monster in the first episode. Wally believes her, saying he's seen the moss man himself, and he takes her on a journey to find this creature again, so they can take a photo for proof. Wally annoys Anne the entire way over, but also saves her from a fall and teaches her about not caring what others think of you. The two eventually make their way to the moss man's home, where Anne catches a glimpse of him. But as they're chasing after him, Wally begins to fall, and Anne chooses to save him over getting proof of Moss Man's existence. Wally reveals he never actually believed in the Moss Man, and only went along with Anne for fun, and the two return to Wartwood, both appearing crazy, but not caring. Sometimes Polly wants to be spoiled. Other times, she wants to be treated like less of a child. Her actual wants change depending on the plot of the week, but this doesn't necessarily mean that she's behaving in an inconsistent way. After all, people can want multiple things, even things that conflict. This is best explored during this episode. Polly wants to have her own room, and get some independence from the family, the way that Sprig and Anne have with one another. But having this independence also means having the responsibility that comes with it. She realizes that she's scared by herself, and she can't simply go to Hop Pop for comfort without contradicting what she said she wanted. Ultimately, being treated like an adult means acting like an adult, though this is not an all-or-nothing sort of deal, as she manages to have the best of both worlds, recognizing when she can help out Bessie and save the family, or when even her older siblings decide they would rather share a bed with the family after a spooky night out. Anne learns from Wally that being weird isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's only a problem if you care deeply about how others view you more than you care about how you view yourself. Anne saw what she saw, and it's a matter of if she can find the beauty in seeing something rare versus only finding the beauty in sharing what she saw with others. It's like eating a nice meal so you can take a picture of it and put it online, versus eating a nice meal to enjoy the food. If anything, being treated like an outcast is a liberating feeling, as you can finally live authentically rather than constantly trying to live up to an expectation that is constantly shifting from person to person. Family fishing trip. The Plantars are going on their annual family fishing trip, where Sprig is excited to spend some quality time with Hop Pop. But Hop Pop has brought along Sylvia for the excursion, leaving Sprig alone for most of the boat ride as Anne is trying to parasail. Sprig tries a few things to sabotage the boat ride so Sylvia will leave, but none of these work and he begins lamenting the lost time with his Hop Pop. Then he sees a giant crab poking out of the water and convinces Sylvia to swim out to it while pulling up the ladder behind her. But Hop Pop then offers to spend some time with Sprig like always, claiming Sylvia saw him sitting alone and requested it, and Sprig demands that they turn the boat around to go rescue her. He uses Anne's parasail to guide the way before pulling her away from the giant crab. Once everyone is safe, he apologizes for trying to get rid of Hop Pop's new lover and admits that he was jealous, as Anne asks them to go back to catch the crab for food. Bazaar. Sprig finds a ticket for the Bazaar in a tree hole while the Plantars are on their way back from the archives. Hop Pop forbids him and Anne from going, so they sneak out in the night, following a creature from inside the ticket to a spot in the woods full of mysterious stands. Anne finds a shop featuring markings similar to the one on her Calamity box, and they wait for it to open, though before she can show this off to Valeriana, the stand's owner, she's pickpocketed by another merchant who places Anne's backpack on his prize wall. She and Sprig have to race the reigning champion of the merchant's track, the Wrecker, to win it back, though they fail when they get hit by a blue shell near the finish line. The bizarre bazaar ends and the two lament that the music box is gone when the Wrecker returns, revealing himself as Hop Pop and scolding them for sneaking out and getting into trouble. Anne agrees to leave the box with Hop Pop and to take her time with learning its secrets, and Hop Pop buries the Calamity box where no one else can find it. Ordinarily, Sprig has plots where he tries and fails to act more mature, and the narrative teaches him a lesson about acting less like a child. But this episode has an interesting inversion, in the sense that Sprig doesn't want to grow up, but instead wants to spend more time doing old-fashioned nostalgic stuff with Hop Pop. And this time, the narrative views his desires as understandable. In fact, there's not really a bad guy in this episode, as all three characters involved in the conflict have an understandable motivation. Sylvia just got there, and didn't understand the family's traditions or dynamics yet, and yet she was quickly able to catch on and give Sprig and Hop Pop the alone time they wanted. Hop Pop was just trying to entertain his new beau while giving Sprig a bit of independence, only returning to the way things used to be when Sylvia gave him the okay. And Sprig just wanted to spend time with his family, only to realize that his family might soon include Sylvia as well. At the bazaar, Anne tries to rush the process of learning more about how to escape from the valley and get home, which makes sense as it's something the Plantars have also agreed to help with. But in trying too hard to get home, she's not only putting herself in dangerous situations, but others as well. I doubt this will be the last time Anne ends up doing something dangerous involving the Calamity box on her way home, and it's practically an inevitability that this ends up happening. So Hop Pop is in the right for now, but eventually his protectiveness might get in the way of Anne maturing. Cursed. Sprig is fretting over his engagement to Maddie, so he asks Anne to break up with her for him, something she does via a written message. While celebrating, they bump into Barry, the local candy merchant, who plays it off. The next morning, Sprig finds out that he's covered in hair, while Anne is sprouting feathers and squawking when she speaks, something that Hop Pop confirms is a curse. They assume it was Maddie who cursed them, and Sprig agrees to apologize, until Maddie herself arrives at the house, where Anne has to force him to do it. Maddie, in spite of being annoyed by the breakup message, says that she wasn't the one who cursed them, and agrees to help them track down the real culprit, revealed as Barry, who only pretends to be nice, as that's part of his brand. He refuses to undo the curse on Sprig and Anne, so Maddie fights him with magic of her own, eventually managing to undo the curse by flipping it onto Barry instead. Once transformed into a hairy bird, Barry agrees to trade a bunch of his candy to Maddie in exchange for the curse being undone, and she and Sprig leave on better terms. Fiddle me this. Wartilda tells Hop Pop that her daughter got into an academy in Newtopia, and realizing that vegetables haven't been selling as well as they used to, Hop Pop gets the idea from a poster for Amphibia's Got Talent to enter Sprig into this contest to show off his fiddle playing, hopefully to win him a sponsorship and a better life. He plans an act based off of moths and proceeds to train Sprig vigorously over the next several days, but Sprig just wanted to have fun and enjoy himself on stage. The day of the contest arrives, with the judges shooting bad acts into the sky. Sprig plays his routine in a shiny suit, and the audience is wowed, until a giant bat flies by thinking Sprig is a real moth, trying to eat him. Hop Pop has Anne launch him into the sky to catch up to the bat, where Polly then uses her bad singing to force it to drop them. Upon landing, Hop Pop apologizes, saying he only wanted Sprig to have a better life than he can provide, and Sprig says his life is fine, with the Plantars rejecting a touring offer. Sprig and Anne make one assumption about Maddie, that she's a cruel and spiteful person, and because of this, they end up in a position made worse by assuming the same thing a second time. The only reason they ever thought she was the one who cursed them was because they assumed that she would be the type to curse someone in the first place. The only reason they were in a position where they thought they might be cursed is because they were afraid of that at all. It wound up being the guy who actively played into stereotypes that he's too nice of a person to be mean who was actually mean, something that Sprig and Anne only ever managed to figure out as they spoke with someone who knew better than to make such assumptions. The family has had a financial struggle in the past, with an entire mini-arc in the middle of the first season all about this. Hop Pop knows that he's not providing for his grandchildren as well as he could, and so he tries to push Sprig to be able to provide for himself with his talent. But there are different ways to ensure your children or grandchildren are able to provide for themselves. Sure, you can push a kid into a stressful career that will make a lot of money, or you can provide them with a good enough home that they wind up with the work ethic and intelligence, emotional or otherwise, to wind up on their feet no matter where life takes them. And it's this latter one that Hop Pop is far more capable of providing. The Big Bugball Game. The Big Bugball Game is coming up. Think basketball. And when the frogs see how well Anne can shoot, they ask her to join the farmers team, so they have a chance against the townie team. Anne tries to convince the farmer team that their best bet to win is to pass the ball to her every time. But during a scrimmage against the townies, this strategy doesn't work as they exclusively cover her. The townies convince Anne to give passing a try, and their teamwork improves. On the day of the game, the townies are taken aback by their strategy of covering Anne not working, and the game winds up even. So Mayor Toadstool has Toady blind Anne with a powder to stop her from helping the team, but she's still able to navigate the field because they practiced this too. She misses the final shot, but Sprig's able to catch the rebound to win the game. Combat Camp. Hop Pop is going to a crop convention for the weekend and leaves the kids at daycare, something Anne resents as she thinks she's too old for this. This daycare is run by Traitonio, who, after Hop Pop leaves, reveals that he actually runs a combat camp for children. Traitonio teaches the kids to fight, though he singles out Anne for extra criticism, something that only makes her resent the situation more. Eventually though, Tritonio gives Anne her own sword, while saying that he only singled her out because he saw the most potential in her, and this makes Anne's opinion of him shift around enough that she ignores that his next mission is for them to rob a train. Using a wounded orphan gambit to get on board, the trio successfully robs this train, only for Tritonio to trap them inside the cargo hold in a betrayal. Polly's able to blast their way out, and Anne winds up defeating him with the same techniques he taught her. In the end, Tritonio is arrested for running a fraudulent daycare, and Hop Pop returns, ragged from the convention. The big Bugball game is the sports episode, sort of an obligatory thing in a lot of kid shows, to the point where it gets parodied and parodied again until the tropes that are included genuinely and the ones that exist to make fun of the concept intertwine, and it becomes hard to tell which is which, or if that distinction even matters. When too many genre tropes are included in a story, they can get in one another's way. The narrative sets up that this will be a story about Anne learning teamwork, but it also establishes that Sprig gets overlooked on the team by Hop Pop and that he ought to have his own chance. But it's also Anne who makes the game-winning play by relying on her teammates for navigation rather than hoarding the ball, even though she's the one to shoot, and then Sprig comes back to make the actual point. The end to this episode is basically a trope pile-up, and it's difficult to tell which one was actually meant to be important. Anne resents teachers and those with a responsibility for or over her, reacting to being told what to do by doing it even less than before. This creates a feedback loop, where she resents strict teachers and reacts by being a bad student, so the teachers get more strict, which makes her push back harder. It's not until realizing that some people want to help others with lessons where she recontextualizes strictness as caring, and Anne is finally able to start taking combat camp more seriously. And then, they rob the train and all. Children of the Spore. When the kids break his model ship, Hop Pop goes to Loggles to get more glue, only for Anne and the rest to keep misbehaving. At the behest of a man named Apothecary Gary, he's given mushroom spores that will make them behave, and when they break the ship again, he decides to test them out. The spores work, and the rest of the Plantars proceed to sit perfectly still as ordered for the next day. Hop Pop applies the spores a second time, and the kids start growing mushrooms on their head, and they head for the door where Apothecary Gary reveals he's actually a mushroom who can control the body of his hosts, and he's controlling most of Wartwood. So Hop Pop runs away, luring them to the garage where Bessie is being kept, and breaking his model ship to free her, as Bessie loves to eat mushrooms. Bessie proceeds to eat all of the mushrooms, including Gary, and Wartwood is saved as Hop Pop apologizes for using brainwashing on the kids because they misbehaved. Before the credits roll, some of these spores proceed to infect Jeremy. Anne of the Year. Wartwood hosts its Frog of the Year contest, and Anne wins, earning the right/responsibility to host a giant party for the town of Wartwood. Mayor Toadstool's unsure if Anne deserves the role, and he casts doubt that her party will turn out alright. So Anne proceeds to push the town hard to make the best party ever, like Sprig to make a love confession to Ivy, convincing Hop Pop to do improv, and allowing Polly to play bouncer. The party arrives with the planned amount of spectacle, though things start going wrong when the planned entree begins to attack people and the entire party catches fire. Anne, realizing she doesn't deserve the title, decides to renounce it and focus on saving people from the inferno, taming the giant fish and teaming up with Toadstool to rescue the townsfolk. She saves everybody and apologizes, and Wartwood reveals they didn't vote for her based on her ability to throw a party, but on how much she has grown since arriving. Ivy confesses to Sprig, and Toady tells Anne there's someone waiting for her outside of town, Sasha. The two friends greet each other as Sasha mentions she's not alone, having an army of toads behind her. This episode begins setting up the first season's finale and the reunion between two of the three girls, reunion being the next episode's name. Thus far, Anne and Sasha's journeys have paralleled more than they think. While Sasha is showing up with an army of toads, Anne has an army of her own, just with a lot less rank and file, and more of a focus on unity. The people of Wartwood had finally learned to accept her, warts and all, as one of their own, and it's that warts and all version of acceptance that matters the most. Because if you claim to be on a person's side, but only like the best parts of that person, you don't really like them, you like what they can do for you. This is what Anne is expecting Wart to expect, so she puts on a lavish party to prove she's earned that acceptance. Except true acceptance is about a person's flaws as much as anything else, to like them not in spite of their problems or because of their problems, but in acceptance of these problems. This is the same way that Sasha was able to get the toads from the tower on her side. She complimented them, not so much for their prowess in battle, but for the little things they do that make them unique. Both characters have attempted to weaponize acceptance, but only one of them is doing so with swords and armor. Reunion. The episode opens on a flashback. Sasha protects Anne from a bully, only to convince her to cut class and spend the day outside, as it's Anne's birthday. She even convinces Anne not to go back home for a family party, to instead head to the shop she stole the Calamity Box from. Back in the present, the toads under the command of Grime have stormed Wartwood, surrounding the people there as the Plantars escape to warn Anne about it. But Anne says it's fine as the toads are with her friend Sasha, and they need to trust her, which they begrudgingly do as Grime announces there's a party for all the frogs back at the tower. Anne sees how Sasha has been living, enthralled by the creature comforts, before learning the girl's plans. She wants to help stamp out a frog rebellion led by Hop Pop, so Grime and the toads will assist in getting her back home. As it turns out, Wartwood refusing to pay their taxes and Hop Pop running for mayor have been construed as rebellion, and Hop Pop has become a symbol of sorts. Anne tries to warn the frogs at the banquet, who have already figured out something is wrong, and they plot an escape through the sewers with Wally planting explosives the whole way. But they get caught anyway and are brought to the top of the tower for Hop Pop's execution, only for Anne to finally stand up to Sasha as she attacked her former friend. Anne wins this fight, though Grime prepares to execute Hop Pop anyway, until the explosives go off and the tower begins to fall. Sasha's about to fall from the tower, but Anne saves her, yet even with the rest of the Plantars holding her up, she's still only dragging them down. So Sasha lets go to save the others as the Plantars make their escape, only getting saved by Grime leaping up to save Sasha. The citizens of Wartwood return home as Anne is thankful to be with her real friends. This is the episode where Anne stands up to Sasha, not because it's the point at which she finally works up the courage to do so, but because it's the point where she first realized that she needed to stand up to her friend in the first place. The easiest way to get taken advantage of is not knowing what it looks like when you're being taken advantage of, and this relationship between Anne and Sasha parallels the treatment of the frogs by the Toad army, occupying their homes as though they were a hostile army. The frogs never fought back against the toads because the frogs didn't realize they could fight back against the toads. So Grime and Sasha both understand the danger in allowing someone to resist, even in a symbolic manner. Hop Hop ran against Toadstool and lost, but he still ran. The fact that he opposed the existing order at all is what convinced the rest of the world that opposing the order was doable, and that fighting back could lead to victories. And however small these victories were, they left the door open for greater wins down the line. But it's not just learning that you can fight back that has to be taught, but that there's even something to fight for in the first place. The frogs in Wartwood were happy in their lives, accepting the oppression at the hands of the toads as an inevitability, just as Anne accepted the fact that Sasha was her friend as natural. She didn't have a frame of reference for what friendship was supposed to look like before arriving in Amphibia and meeting the Plantar family and the rest of the frogs. And once she realized what friendship was supposed to be like, she realized that that was not what she had with Sasha. Season 1 Retrospective. The first season of Amphibia is done, and one of Anne's main goals has been finished, while the other is further away than before. And with a bit of irony, the further goal is the one she is okay being away from, while the goal she achieved was something negative. Anne wanted to reunite with her friends and was able to find Sasha after 3 months, only to realize that Sasha was never really her friend, and she had a much better relationship with the frogs of Wartwood. Her other goal of getting home is further away, as yet another potential avenue of escape was found to be not worth the cost. And yet staying in Amphibia even longer is not such a high price to pay, again, because of the new family she's found in the Plantars. Structurally, the first season comes across as a series of loosely connected plots that can be watched in just about any order, which although I'm not going to check until after finishing the video so the React part of the title still makes more sense, I would have to assume this comes from a desire by executives to only air a show that can be rerun on TV for general audiences who only need to loosely understand what's going on. But in a less marketing executive sort of thinking, this is also a way to introduce characters and get the audience to sympathize with their wants and such before raising stakes later on. It's harder to care about the fate of a bunch of strangers than it is to care about a bunch of people we've seen living regular, normal lives. These regular, normal lives are what's at stake every time some plot development occurs, after all. So whether the slow pace was intentional or an affordance to get airtime, or some combination of the two, it still serves the overall narrative, not by adding to it, but by reinforcing that these stakes matter. This is the major difference between Anne and Sasha's motivations by this point. Anne has gotten to know the Plantars and so many others that she cares about, whether or not Amphibia is destroyed. Sasha doesn't care what happens because she's planning to leave anyway. And this is mirrored by their conflict, as Sasha gets what she wants by being nice, whereas Anne has been acting nice for the sake of acting nice. It's worth comparing end results, like how Anne defended Wart against the Toads, despite the fact that they hadn't really accepted her, and she assumed they'd continue to not accept her even after she stood up for them, versus the fact that Sasha stood up for the Toads only because she assumed she would be getting something in return from it. Likewise, Anne hung out with Sasha that day 3 months ago because she believed the two of them to be friends, whereas Sasha hung out with Anne because she wanted an enabler to justify her actions. Both girls act nice, but truly nice people don't do nice things because they want something in return, be it a way home or a person to go home with. Handy Anne. The Plantars prepare to leave for Newtopia, where they can learn more about a way home, with Hop leaving the house in the care of Chuck from the Bugball team. But as they're all packing for a trip in the wagon, Anne starts to feel bad about making her family pack for such a long journey away from home, and seeing Chuck struggling with some of the local fauna, she decides to help reinforce the house with the trip to Loggles. There, she buys everything she'll need to place traps and such around the house, as well as a mysterious green ooze that should help the plants defend themselves. And this ooze causes the crops to grow monstrous and attack the Plantars. Anne defends them from attacks, even after the plants turn into a golem, but when this golem steps in another trap, it falls down onto the house, crushing it. Anne apologizes for going overboard, saying she only wanted to pay them back for their sacrifices. But Hop insists it's not a big deal, and that they're doing the trip with her and not for her, as Chuck is called on to quickly fix up the place, the real reason he was chosen. Fort in the road. The Plantars are taking the wagon out of the valley, though for their safety, Hop has them follow a list of road rules that mostly keep them inside the wagon rather than stopping at the sites along the way. Feeling restricted, Anne and Sprig decide to fake car sickness to get out and see the ruins of despair, so they can take a selfie. They accidentally fall in, discovering a futuristic-looking factory that Sprig reactivates when curious about a lever. This begins an assembly line for something that runs out of materials and tries to use Hop instead. Unable to stop the machines with a disc to insert to override the commands, Sprig jams Hop's road rules into the device, which malfunctions, freeing him as they flee an explosion. Anne apologizes for leaving the wagon, but Hop admits he shouldn't have kept them so cooped up out of fear. The family decides to stop for ice cream as a robot rises from the factory ruins. Anne is concerned about setting off on the journey to Newtopia as she considers it an inconvenience for the family, so she tries to preemptively pay them back by working around the house to minimize the adjustment period for when they return home. Where she makes her mistake, though, is in assuming that the debts between family have to be repaid immediately, or that they have to be repaid at all. Part of what it means to be a family means having people who will help you out without expecting something in return but your continued company. The fact that Anne is trying to think in terms of paying them back and then being even means that she hasn't really understood what family means, at least not this implicitly. But by the end of the episode, she saved the day and actually made them even for bringing all the crops to life, and then she proceeds to tell the truth about why that happened, even though they were all squared up. Not because she wanted to be even, but because she wanted to be fair. Hop, as usual, tries to protect his family from danger, only to give them a taste for it, as the draw of something forbidden only adds to the sense of curiosity. Had he been a bit more forthcoming with innocent stops to satiate their interest, then they would have been more relaxed on the trip and less likely to want to do everything that they saw out the window. But more interestingly, this episode also reveals that the agrarian society of Wartwood is not the technological limit of what's going on in Amphibia. There are ruins of a more advanced civilization all around them, and that makes the earlier curiosity all that much more validated. The Ballad of Hopediah Plantar. The Plantars make the first stop of their road trip in the small town of Bittyburg, as in a literal small town. But while they're stopped, they see Judro Hasselback, a regular-sized toad, harassing the townsfolk, and hoping to impress Sprig, Hop-Pop fights off the bully. But Judro returns with the rest of the Hasselback gang, and they push Hop-Pop out of town. But as they're back on the road, Hop-Pop realizes that he only stood up to the man because of a song Sprig wrote that made him sound bad, rather than doing this for the sake of doing the right thing. They return to town where Hop-Pop claims he'll fight off the gang, though it's really Sprig shooting his slingshot from a cliff that's hitting them. When this ruse is revealed and Sprig gets knocked down, Hop-Pop is beaten again. But remembering a speech from before that he gave, the citizens of Bittyburg go crazy and attack the gang members to defend him, with the Plantars running away and agreeing never to speak of it again. Anne Hunter. As the journey is taking longer than expected, the Plantars have run out of food, so they need to hunt for more in the woods. Sprig offers to teach Anne the Plantar family ritual dance, which can be used to calm animals and make them easier to trap, though Anne rejects this lesson in favor of more traditional methods. But once she returns to camp, she finds that the Plantars are missing, taken by a Scorpileo. Anne begins to hallucinate a floating Sprig head who teaches her about the Plantar family methods for hunting, and when she tests out bizarre ideas like tasting dirt, she actually manages to find the Scorpileo's den and set a trap for it. Anne then uses the ritual dance to lure the beast away from the others, where it leaps into her trap, giving the Plantars the time to escape back to Bessie. Sprig, always talented with the fiddle, wrote a song about Hopediah that left in details about his actual actions when it came to resisting the occupation of the toads in their society. These details prove what Hop-Pop is concerned about. He is more of a symbol than an active part of the resistance, as he hasn't really done anything but what came naturally, sometimes not even by his own doing. So in order to prove that he's not just a figurehead, he tries to resist further bullying in Bittyburg. This winds up failing when a bigger frog comes by to prove he can't cut it as a defender of the innocent. But the episode ends positively when he sees that his failure to act has served as a rallying point for the smaller, oppressed majority of the frogs. Being a figurehead means inspiring others. It doesn't mean you have to do everything yourself. Anne has a fantasy about being a great hunter that is proven to fall flat in the face of actual hunting, which isn't nearly as cool as what her imagination came up with. The Plantar ritual dance is silly but proven to work, and sometimes, especially when it comes to survival, function is far more important than form, to the point that it's all there is. After all, if it sounds stupid, but it works, then it's not stupid. Truck Stop Polly. Polly is feeling homesick during the long journey, so she tries to get the family to spend some time with her, reading stories or playing tag with static electricity. But the Plantars are too busy with navigation and resting after long stretches of driving to play with her, and when she overhears Hop-Pop lamenting that he ought to have left Polly with a babysitter back home, she decides to swap places with a Polly-colored rock she found to see if they'll miss her. The Plantars think this is just Polly taking a nap and decide not to disturb her as they go back on the road, and Polly plans to start a new life as a trucker. But the other truckers, including Sulky Joe, tell her that she shouldn't have taken out her homesickness on the others, and then Polly learns the rock she swapped was actually the egg of a frog-eating monster. Polly and Joe, now Speedy Joe, get on his snail to catch up before the egg hatches, but they're too late. Polly's able to build up enough static electricity to launch herself at the bird, shocking it into submission and saving the family, who are mad at her, not for endangering their lives, but running away. A caravan named Desire. While traveling through the dry swamp, Hop-Pop tells the rest of the Plantars about his dreams of being an actor. and then they're attacked by a sandworm, saved by a traveling theater troupe that Sprig and Hop Pop are eager to join. But Sprig doesn't get accepted by these theater kids because he can't convincingly play a character, though Hop Pop does get the lead role after a bit of inadvertent auditioning. The troupe proceeds to travel around the swamp, performing for various crowds, until Hop Pop overhears the lead playwright Renee planning a robbery. As it turns out, the actors were merely distractions for the rest of the troupe to rob banks and the like, and Hop Pop decides to ignore this revelation to continue his career. During the next play, Sprig finally gives up on winning over the other kids, but his announcement that he dislikes them convinces them that he can act after all. Hop Pop finally starts to feel guilty over his involvement in this robbery, and he confesses the scheme to the town, with Renee trying to run away, only to get taken out by the sandworm from the start. Hop Pop, having changed his mind about acting, convinces the rest of the family to leave before the police start questioning his involvement any further. Much in the same way that Anne recently learned that relationships aren't supposed to be reciprocal, Polly also starts to realize the same thing but from a different perspective. She's bored on the road trip, so she tries to pass the time the same way that she always has, unaware that the rest of the family's too busy with the trip itself to do that. Polly feels as though everyone is paying less attention to her, and she's right, they are. What she doesn't consider, though, is the why. Everyone's more busy with the road than with each other, so it's not like they're ignoring her meant as a personal slight. But replacing herself on the trip to force them to turn around was, and it's realizing that she retaliated against an innocent group that forces Polly to also realize she's being a burden by maintaining the status quo. Just as before, Hop Pop wanted to embody an ideal instead of just representing it, and here he gets to become an actor and bring joy to the faces of an audience, only to learn that his acting is having the opposite effect. So he's forced to choose between feeling like a beloved figure and actually doing what a beloved figure would do and stand for something other than his own fleeting popularity. But Hop Pop is able to resist the allure of acting out his dream to live the reasons behind the dream. Some people want to be famous for the sake of being famous. Others want their works to be more famous than they are. And no play will be quite as rewarding to act in as a knowledge that you've done the right thing. Quarreler's Pass. Anne and Hop Pop are tired of listening to Sprig and Polly arguing with each other in the back of the wagon, which they've been doing non-stop for the last 2 weeks. So Hop Pop drops them off at Quarreler's Pass, a series of teamwork trials designed to force 2 people to work together. Sprig and Polly are upset they have to do these, but eventually they manage to clear them by remembering other things they've done together and cooperating. They're about to meet back up with the main road when a blockade redirects them to a narrow, winding tunnel, where they begin to bicker again, splitting up at a divide in the path, where a giant 2-headed olm accosts them. They get chased into a cavern full of bones, where the blind olms fail to find them because they are too busy arguing. Realizing the olms are arguing the same way they used to, Polly and Sprig make a plan to apologize to Anne and Hop Pop, as well as each other. They do impressions of the olms to make them keep fighting as they escape, reuniting with the wagon, where Hop Pop has been offering unsolicited relationship advice to fill the awkward silence. Toadcatcher. Grime is overweight and out of shape, binge-watching Suspicion Island in a hideout in the woods with Sasha, who's maintaining her training after losing the fight against Anne last season. Her attempts to have Percy and Braddock, the only 2 toads from the tower who remained with him, to scare him into fighting don't work, so Sasha sends them into town for supplies, where they get accosted by General Yunan, who's been hunting for Grime, who's been branded a traitor. She gets his location by listening in on the duo before heading out to attack. Sasha, realizing the duo are outmatched, flees the fight with Grime behind her, though the man is out of shape and he lags behind. As they're running, he points out that the only reason she was training in the first place was not because she lost the fight against Anne, but the friendship they had as well, and Sasha says she doesn't want to lose his friendship too. Re-motivated, Grime helps Sasha push Yunan off a cliff before announcing that he's going to start training again, not to return to his old position, but to take over Newtopia for the Toads instead. Sasha continues her training while Grime festers in complacency as the 2 are hidden from bounty hunters sent by Newtopia. The reason she is still motivated is explained by Grime not as some noble cause, but the fact that she feels resentful for having lost a battle and a friend at the end of last season. But Sasha points out that this motivation is still noble after all. She does feel bad about losing a friend, not through losing the fight, but for having fought in the first place. So she continues training to be strong enough not to have to rely on militaristic forces to guide her through Amphibia that could result in her being forced onto a villainous side. What she does beyond this point has to be done through her own strength and her own convictions. And this is how she manages to motivate Grime back into his old self again, by convincing him that he still has a reason to fight. He used to fight for his position at the tower, but that was never really for himself, just as the toads working under him were inept because they lacked motivation other than fear. So for once, he has something to train for, as his end goal is something he decided for himself, taking matters into his own hands for the sake of a friend. Swamp and Sensibility. Bessie's reigns break outside of Ribbitvale, the most expensive town in Amphibia, and they need to make a stop in this fancy town. But as soon as they show up, they find one-eyed Wally hanging around, dressed in fancy clothing and introduced as Walliam Ribbiton, the heir to the Ribbiton family fortune. His father Wigbert offers to repair their broken reins, as he believes that the Plantars are servants from his time in Wartwood, and they're given a tour of the mansion. On this tour, Anne learns that Wally is miserable in his position with the family, and that he prefers his life as a wandering vagrant. So Anne shows the Ribbitons a compilation of his time in Wartwood to prove that Wally is happier that way. All this accomplishes, though, is getting Wally disowned, so he challenges his father to a family challenge of Beast Polo for his right to leave Ribbitvale rather than taking over the family business. He uses Anne as a mount, as his previous beast was Ribbiton property, and the two are able to win the game by using one of Wally's accordions hidden nearby. Wigbert accepts that his son is going to leave, but Wally says he's not planning to leave for good, just roaming a bit more freely. Wax Museum. The Plantars stop in Stony Gulch with no money to shop around, until some of the locals start giving money to Anne as an attraction. With this money, she decides to visit the other local oddity, the Mystery Shop, the Curiosity Hut, which is a wax museum run by the curator. The Plantars are freaked out by the wax figures, but Anne's excited, especially when she sees some human world technology on display. Anne offers to buy it in exchange for working as an oddity for a day, and the curator agrees, but the rest of the family insists that she at least sleep on it. But Anne sneaks out in the night to start preparing, where the curator reveals the secret of his wax figures. They're all real creatures that he encased in wax, and Anne is going to join them. The Plantars notice Anne is missing, and they head to the Curiosity Hut to save her, where they see her getting encased in wax. Polly's investigations into a particular statue lead her to learn that the wax can be melted, and they free all the wax monsters, who then attack the curator as Anne gets freed. She apologizes for taking such a risk to learn more about how to get home, but also says that the curator mentioned the CD player came from Newtopia, so they're on the right path. I wasn't subtle about it, but this episode is a massive homage to Gravity Falls, the show that spawned the careers of so many of the names from the credits of this show. I even mentioned at the start of this video that Gravity Falls, alongside Owl House, were a trio of shows that are frequently packaged together in both fandom and style. So an episode like this is an inevitability, though it would be nice to know how this episode was received by people unfamiliar with Gravity Falls, if such an Amphibia fan existed. Part of me wants to say that the tone of the episode with light horror elements fits in well, as we've had a few horror-themed episodes in the last season anyway, but this is also a part of me that knows all the references, so a Grunkle Stan character can appear without really raising any confusion as to what's going on. The best references are references that fans of both works can understand, but fans of only a single one won't feel left out of. What's also an extended reference is the first half of this episode, Swamp and Sensibility, though more of the reference lies in the fictional movie From Point to Poppin' that Anne-Sterminator watched at the start. Anne attempting to recreate the conditions of that movie in real life are what caused the conflict in this episode to boil over, but sometimes this sort of escalation is what it takes to start to reach a conclusion. Marcy at the gates. The Plantars arrive at Newtopia, only to find that the gates have been shut due to a barbary ant infestation just outside. As they're struggling against these giant ants, a hooded figure leaps from the walls to save them, revealed as Marcy, the other girl Anne was sent to Amphibia alongside. Anne talks about her time with Marcy back in the human world, that she's very smart but very clumsy, enough that they always had to take care of her. The Plantars quickly grow to like her, except for Sprig, who's concerned that she might end up betraying them the way Sasha did. Marcy takes them to a war camp where a group of newts are bickering over strategy when she reveals her own plan, to use a pheromone bomb to drive the Barbary ants away. Anne insists on doing the mission herself, assuming that Marcy is too clumsy to be trusted with explosives, but Marcy heads out anyway, stumbling through the ants' caves with Sprig watching her the whole time. She accidentally traps Polly at one point before getting chased into the Queen's room, where they all have to be careful not to make any noise or the blind Queen will call in the others. But Anne fails at this when she pushes Marcy out of the way of a rock, and when Sprig gets bit due to being covered in pheromone. The ants swarm the chamber right as Marcy's bomb goes off, scaring away the ants and saving them all. The gates to the city open and the Plantars are finally led inside, where they're greeted by Lady Olivia, to whom Marcy presents the Ant Queen's head. As the Plantars begin to unpack, Anne and Marcy finally get to catch up, talking about how Sasha used to make all their plans, but times have since changed. Anne finally reunites with Marcy and is prepared to spend time with her just like the good old days that she spent so long talking about. But these good old days that she spent so long discussing with the Plantars are the same good old days that she spent with Sasha, and Sasha ended up almost killing them at the end of last season. So Sprig is naturally a bit concerned over whether Marcy is going to end up the same way, and that perhaps Anne is not as good a judge of character as she claims to be, that Marcy has changed and Anne hasn't realized it yet. And this is true. Marcy has changed, and Anne didn't realize it. But rather than changing to become the type of person to betray others, she has changed into the type of person who doesn't need others as much. So when Anne tries to recreate the old days, she tries to coddle someone who doesn't need this coddling, and this then points to a potential future conflict. Anne wants to go back home. They all do. But all three of these girls have changed so much because of their time in Amphibia that going home in spirit is impossible. Amphibia has visited them as much as they have visited Amphibia. The end result of these changes is that we are getting introduced to Marcy at the same time that Anne is also being introduced to Marcy, the girl she knew, being totally different from the one she's meeting now. This goes opposite the introduction to Anne at the very beginning of the series, as we saw her from an outsider's point of view, seeing the world of Amphibia before the main character. Here, we're meant to be introduced to Newtopia, but instead of seeing the new setting, we focus on the introduction to the character of Marcy, with the city behind her only being seen insofar as it's seen in the context of the changes it's made to a character we weren't especially familiar with in the first place. So just as Anne has grown as a person by living in Wartwood with the Plantars, Marcy has changed by Newtopia, and the next few episodes will show whether these changes are for the better or for the worse. At least, I guess so. I haven't actually seen them yet. Scavenger Hunt. While showing off her knowledge about the world of Newtopia, Marcy receives an encrypted message from the king that she is eager to translate via a scavenger hunt around the city. Anne and Sprig go with Marcy, with Anne complaining about how being near Marcy makes her feel less intelligent by comparison. Sprig assures her that she can rebuild her confidence by solving some of the puzzles herself, though when Anne actually tries solving any of these puzzles, she's just overshadowed by Marcy, usually left behind, where she helps some random stranger instead. Eventually she begins to pout that she'll never be as smart as Marcy when Marcy gets stumped on the last clue. So at the advice of a recently befriended stranger, Anne comes up with her own solution involving a trip to the sewers that sees them chased by an alligator. But the newly befriended Newtopians come to their aid, rescuing Anne, Sprig, and Marcy from the sewers. Marcy then laments that Anne is far more talented at getting along with people than she is, as they both realize they have their own strengths, and they ought not to be so jealous of each other. Then, Anne manages to piece together the final clue, spelling out the message, "Bring me the Plantars." The Plantars check in. The Plantar family is brought to King Andreas, where they discuss the music box, which Anne doesn't have, though a picture she took of it calls attention to the fact that the gems on it are all gray, rather than the colors they should be. While the king has his scholars work with this information, he gives a royal credit card to the Plantars, so they can relax in the kingdom with unlimited funds. But as the Plantars are all resting, Sprig takes the card and, at the advice of a bellhop named Bella, starts spending around the hotel, including an irresponsible amount of espresso shots. But as he's about to ride the giant indoor Ferris wheel, he drops the royal credit card, and it falls into the hands of Bella, who plans to take it for herself after finding out what it is. Sprig chases her to the top of the Ferris wheel, where they both appreciate the sight before she slips off, and Sprig drinks the last of his coffee to get an energy burst that allows him to pile all the pillows in the hotel beneath her, saving both Bella and the card. When her manager comes over prepared to fire her for this, Sprig sticks up for Bella and saves her job before returning to his room. The rest of the Plantars wake up refreshed, urging him to go out and explore despite his caffeine crash. Anne is jealous of Marcy, who's jealous of Anne, both girls having some sort of skill or ability the other one lacks, which makes them feel inferior. For Anne, it's her ability to quickly befriend just about anyone she meets, her social skills making people warm up to her quickly. For Marcy, it's her natural intelligence that makes learning new things effortless. At least, that's how it appears to an outsider, or anyone who hasn't seen the actual legwork that goes into these natural skills. Because the truth is that Anne was not naturally beloved by everyone she met. She had to spend basically a whole season to get Wart to warm up to her, as she slowly learned their customs and adapted to the new world she found herself in. And Marcy isn't naturally intelligent about Newtopia, she's just good at learning, something you can get good at the way any other skill can also be learned. When Marcy comes across something she hasn't seen before, she pulls out her notebook and begins to write down as much about it as she can, researching to find out the answers to the gaps in her knowledge. Most things that people are naturally good at are not baked into their DNA, but their upbringing. What kind of behavior was rewarded the most, and what results will that behavior have? If knowledge is valued somewhere like, say, Newtopia, then people there will end up being smarter as they seek out whatever works best. Whereas when you're dropping into a more agrarian culture with strong attachments to the community, then social behavior is what most people will pick up on the fastest. Lost in Newtopia. The Plantars are killing time while Andreas and Marcy research the music box by sitting through a safe, boring tour of Newtopia. So Anne and Polly sneak off the bus by faking illness so they can explore the city the way the locals do, eating the same food, wearing the same clothes, and attending the same parties. But their attempts to eat the same spicy food ends with them burning down a street food stand. Their attempts to wear the same tails end with them smacking random pedestrians around, and their attempts to party end up desecrating a memorial service for a war hero. The Newtopians chase them around the city where they decide they're done pretending they're not tourists, and Anne make their way back to the tour bus where they drive off the mob with Polly's fire breath. Back at the castle, Marcy and Andreas have exhausted every book there before accidentally discovering a secret wing of the library. Sprig gets schooled. The Plantars come across Newtopia University, a college that Hop has always dreamed of sending one of his grandkids to. While playing on the commons, Sprig comes across an outdoor lesson that he's able to participate in by using his real-world knowledge. This impresses Professor Herringbone enough that he offers Sprig a position in the school's youth learning program to scout him for potential enrollment. Hop's excited about this, as is Sprig, until actually attending the classes, which he's unprepared for as he gets distracted too easily. Anne and Polly are watching Human Realm college flicks, and they get the idea to sneak into a college party, while Hop gets too nostalgic for Sprig's old things, and he tries to save his grandson from getting trapped inside after the campus goes on lockdown for the night. Sprig, meanwhile, has broken out of the university after realizing that Herringbone liked him enough to offer immediate enrollment, and he'll be trapped there for years. They're all caught near the gates as Herringbone explains that Sprig was free to leave all along, something he does when he admits he isn't ready to learn yet, and something Hop's also excited to hear. Sprig Gets Schooled closely parallels the plot of Fiddle Me This, with Hop trying to make a better life for his grandchildren while pushing Sprig too hard into something he wants to do at first but changes his mind after seeing the intensity of what's being asked. Both episodes even share Newtopia University as a plot point. This is then placed into two parts of the Plantars eagerly seeking out acceptance in a new location, only to realize that perhaps it's better to remain as they are. Polly and Anne attempt to be more like the locals in Newtopia, but are not adapted to this environment, and they make things far worse than had they accepted their differences, wearing the fashions they prefer and eating the foods they like, instead of forcing compliance out of a sense of curiosity. And Sprig wants to be like the well-educated newts, at first using his real-world experience to wow the professors before learning they're only interested in accepting him as a challenge to straighten the kid out to be more like they are, despite the fact that it was his unique approach to learning that caused them to scout him in the first place. This is actually a pretty clever way of introducing Newtopia, not through the wonders it can bring, but the differences it ought not to. By contrasting the characters we know with places that we don't, this new setting can be introduced not in a vacuum, but in comparison to something the audience is already familiar with. Skip over the similarities, as the audience knows about these already, and then only show conflict. Little Frog Town. Hop Pop takes the family to Sal's Wartwood-style sandwiches, a restaurant run by one of Hop Pop's old friends, famous for its sauce. The kids are more interested in the arcade next door, so Hop Pop enters alone, only to find the place ransacked. Remembering a detective film Anne showed them before, Hop Pop puts on a fedora and starts to search for clues, tracking the trail to a party held nearby that's serving Sal's sauce. He is thrown out of this event, but finds a sauce can in the dumpster, heading to a factory where it's made. After fighting with security, he's taken to the man in charge, revealed as Sal. Sal explains that the sandwich shop wasn't making enough money, so he started selling just the sauce, which was far more popular, to the point of expanding to serve galas. Hop Pop returns to meet up with the kids, who were banned from the arcade after Anne threatened to eat a child for cutting in line. Hopping Mall. Hop Pop takes the Plantar family to the outdoor mall so they can buy souvenirs, warning them not to spend more than 2 coppers and to haggle instead. Polly buys a gold-plated bucket and a personal chauffeur named Microangelo, while Anne searches for something for her mother, finding a teapot that would be perfect, but the only way to get it is by winning a shopping cart derby. Using her mall experience, Anne is able to pick out a cart decent enough to give Priscilla the Killa, a smug newt who's the reigning champion, a decent challenge. The match begins with most of the competitors out early, as Priscilla and Anne face off as they inadvertently charge towards Polly. Priscilla has to use her injured tail to break, eventually getting weakened enough for Sprig to knock her out with the gift he was going to give to Ivy when they returned. Anne wins the teapot only to learn that it was made by Priscilla's mother before she passed, and Anne agrees to give it to her, to which Priscilla's daughter thanks her with a butterfly trinket. They return to the hotel where Sprig asks Anne about her mother, talking about how he never knew his. The Saul sauce story ends with a plainly explained moral about how the past will become history no matter what, and that clinging to the past only means you'll end up forgotten about, much in the same way that Sal's sandwich shop began to fail. It's only by looking towards the future that you become able to write the future, and to write it in such a way as to include yourself. It's not like you have to choose between embracing or rejecting change. You can be the change yourself, and get the best of both worlds, a familiar world that's still better than what came before. Anne wants to get her mother a present as a way to ease the pain of having been apart from her for so long, and despite the fact that Sprig never knew his mother, he is asked to help with this chore. It is somewhat of an insensitive thing to do, and yet Anne can't really be faulted, since her intentions were concerned with her own mother, who she assumes is worried sick. What she also fails to realize is that Priscilla could have had some valid motivation for her attempts to get the teapot as well. By trying so hard to win, Anne has to take away a prize from others, or rub it in their face that they don't have anyone to win the prize for. It's not as though Anne is the bad guy, though. The episode sets up that Priscilla has an injured tail, and that Anne and Sprig could exploit that to win more easily. But they refuse to do so, even checking to make sure that it's not holding her back too much before landing the finishing move. It wouldn't have been the same to have denied someone else a happy ending to get her own, so Anne's smaller gift for her mother ends up being a far greater one. The sleepover to end all sleepovers. It's the night before the Plantars' meeting with King Andrias, so Sprig, Polly, Anne, and Marcy all have a sleepover in Marcy's room. They think back to the kind of sleepovers they had when Sasha planned everything for them, and come up with the idea to do a Scare Dare challenge, where whoever chickens out first has to write their name in the Book of Losers. This challenge consists of going to the basement of the castle and through several halls of mirrors, before finding a bunch of coffins floating in a room. Sprig and Polly dare Marcy and Anne to take a selfie in front of one of these coffins, where they notice a floating ghost of sorts following them. The group runs away past several oddities, including a captive moss man, before returning to Marcy's room, where they learn that the mirrors can turn the ghosts tangible enough to be fought off. After pushing the ghosts out of the room, they all gather in bed to write their names in the Book of Losers, where it's revealed that Anne and Marcy have had their names written there several times before. A day at the aquarium. The Plantars meet with Andreas, who has learned that the music box works as a portal to other worlds, but also that it needs 3 gems charged to function, charges that can be obtained at 3 temples. Marcy prepares for this journey, but the Plantars need to make it back to Wartwood in time for the harvest, meaning that Anne will be separated from them because she needs to stay in Newtopia to prepare. With only 1 day to spend time together, the Plantars go to the aquarium to relax, though every exhibit they encounter only reminds them of the various monsters they've fought in the last 3 months. So they search for something that won't make them cry, a show about rays, though this show has a water snake from the 2nd episode, and Sprig's tears caused the rays to attack him. The Plantars work together to fight off the attacking animals, pushing them into the ocean where they swim away. They get kicked out of the venue, but are happy to have made one last memory before being separated. Seeing how sad Anne was during the goodbye, Marcy decides to allow her to travel back with the Plantars, with Andreas making her an offer as they watch the others leave. Marcy is a character who wears her heart on her sleeve, not so much because she's intentionally open and honest about her emotions, but because it's never occurred to her not to do just that. I've seen online that people try to label her with some sort of ASD diagnosis. I'm not sure if this was ever an intentional feature of her characterization by the showrunners, though, but the best representation is often unintentional. When trying to make a character with a 3-letter mental condition, so many creatives will focus on taking as many of the list of symptoms as possible and cramming them into one character, rather than writing the character first, then adding a few of the traits of the condition to add a layer of depth. So Marcy may or may not be autistic, but she's good representation because she's a good character rather than a good autist. As for her other traits, she tends to be overly logical when it comes to problem solving, focusing on a single major issue, but not understanding the smaller motivations of those around her. Sure, Anne wants to get home to her family, the same way that Sasha and Marcy do, but she also loves the family she's found in Wartwood and will miss having them around once they get home. So there's a conflict of wanting to never see her family again in order to see her family again, that makes even the good things they're discovering about the Calamity Box into issues. Night Drivers. The Plantars are only a day away from making it back to Wartwood, though Hop and Anne have been awake for so long, they can't finish the trip overnight. Sprig and Polly decide to take over while the others are asleep, driving Bessie in secret as they think they can handle the task. But as the night goes on, they find the road blanketed in fog as large creatures begin stalking them until they meet a hitchhiker with the hooked hand who they run away from. They keep fleeing only to find him at the next fork in the road, taking the opposite path he gestures to before he appears on top of the cart trying to grab the reins. He ends up stopping Bessie near a cliff overlooking Wartwood, where Sprig and Polly discover a statue to Zechariah Nettles, whose ghost they believe was actually trying to guide them to safety. Hop and Anne wake up from their strange dreams, attempting to scold the kids before realizing they might have learned their lesson already. Return to Wartwood. The Plantars are finally back in Wartwood, where the whole town greets them, eager to get the presents from Newtopia they were promised. As it turns out, Hop made a list of gifts to bring back home that they forgot about, and despite Anne warning them not to lie about it, they all agree to fake an accident to destroy the gifts so they don't look bad for forgetting. Using a copy of a book from Maddie, they're able to summon the Chickalisk, a giant bird who eats gold, and during a huge party where all the presents will be opened, this monster descends on them where it starts to eat all the fake gifts. But the townsfolk refuse to sit by and watch, attempting to defend the presents and antagonizing the monster who begins to attack them. The Plantars have to get everyone under control to make it look as though they aren't on the Chickalisk side, while still looking like they want to stop what's happening, and they manage to form the Chickalisk formation after the presents are all melted, which offends the bird enough it leaves. The people of Wartwood apologize for not fighting hard enough to defend the gifts, and the Plantars finally crack and admit the truth. But rather than being mad, the townsfolk are just glad to have the Plantars back, hijinks and all. The Plantars' return to Wartwood is signified more so by their actions than their actual presence in town, with everyone missing the monsters and adventures more than they wanted physical, tangible objects. But it's likely that they already knew the town of Wartwood wasn't so shallow as to want stuff. Instead, they were hoping that the trip to the big city would have changed them for the better, and that the Plantars could make it there and back with enough character building they no longer have a reputation for pulling a plantar, and instead get a reputation for having traveled to distant lands. So retrieving a bunch of gifts is a way to leave a reminder in people's houses about the journey they took, so they'll associate the Plantars with something else. But the town of Wartwood already associates the Plantars with a new idea, the idea of all the hijinks they keep bringing back with them. They wanted so much to change their reputation that they failed to realize this already happened. Maybe not in the way they wished it had, but it has changed nonetheless, and it's the townsfolk accepting this change as much as they would have accepted the other that makes the Plantar family realize it's okay they didn't bring back any souvenirs. The Shut-In. In this Halloween special episode, the town is preparing for the Shut-In, a holiday where people barricade their doors so they don't look at and get possessed by the blue moon. Once locked up, they pass the time by telling scary stories, but Polly can't think of anything and keeps trying to retell earlier episodes. So Anne starts off by telling the tale of FOMO, like FOMO but with your phone, that takes place in a school that was similar to but distinct enough for deniability from hers. In this story, human versions of the other frogs discuss a cute animal video, in spite of a warning that everyone who watches it disappears. Anna and Twig decide not to take the risk, but Molly does, only to disappear later that day alongside Hattie and Brody. Anna's curiosity, or fear of missing out, gets the best of her, and she watches it too, only for her phone to start flashing strangely before the animal from the video pops out. It begins attacking Anna until she points out that it isn't that cute, and she realizes that negative feedback harms the creature. After a bit of disliking the video, she defeats it with a rude comment, and her friends are all saved. The next story is told by Hop Pop, titled Dead End, where he describes how much hair he had as a lad before getting on with the tale. A mysterious stranger named Mr. Littlepot gets into his carriage, and Hopediah takes him around Wartwood, stopping at the houses of some of the residents along the way, only for them to scream before Littlepot gets back in the carriage. Hopediah starts to suspect that Littlepot is death before they arrive at the Plantar farm. Hopediah begs for his life only for Littlepot to swipe his scythe and take his hair instead, explaining why he's bald. The third story is told by Sprig, titled Skin Deep, where he and Ivy knock a Bugball into the woods. The two head deeper into the woods, where Ivy warns Sprig about the seamstress, who steals the skin of frogs. They enter a cottage that looks abandoned, where they find the ball along with some sewing supplies, before they're cornered by a monster made of stitched-together skin. Ivy tries to fight it but gets bit, so Sprig attacks the monster, accidentally ripping off its head to reveal a translucent glass frog beneath, before running away. Hop Pop and Anne are terrified of this story before they hear a knocking on the door. Sprig answers it to reveal the seamstress there waiting, though it's actually Ivy in a costume pulling a prank on them. They all have a laugh before noticing Polly staring at the blue moon, terrified she's become possessed. The fear that the moon got to her, though, is enough to count as a frightening story, and they all head inside, only for Polly to actually start to transform. Ivy on the run. Ivy is excitedly listening on Sprig's tales of his travels over the last half-season, which only makes her resent her mother more, as Felicia keeps her from her dates with him to focus on learning how to perform tea ceremony and the like. After getting scolded for messing the napkins and table setting up, Ivy decides to run away with Sprig so they can start reliving the journey he just took. But Felicia is furious about her daughters trying to leave, and she tracks her down to a clearing where Anne, Polly, and Wally are learning Muay Thai. Felicia challenges her daughter to a match for the right to leave home, and the tea shop owner shows expertise in fighting as she's able to dodge all of Ivy's moves. But before Ivy loses, her mother tells her to use her tea ceremony techniques to disarm her and fight back, and Ivy's able to turn the tables, pun not intended. But rather than continuing to run away, Ivy's instead fascinated by her mother's techniques. As Felicia explains, she learned it all on her travels, and that the tea ceremony training was to make Ivy strong enough to thrive when they eventually travel to buy more tea in the future. After the rain. Anne gets a letter from Marcy saying that they're finally ready to go to the first temple, and all they have to do is bring over the music box. But when Hop Pop tries to dig it up, he finds it's missing, and Anne catches him as he's unable to produce it, running away to the cave she spent the first night in before finding the Plantars. Seeing the family split up over this, Sprig and Polly decide to track down the music box themselves, seeing a bunch of holes in the ground in Wartwood and learning from Soggy Joe about magpie beetles, who burrow underground to steal valuables that they bring to a mating ritual of sorts. Sprig and Polly are able to follow these burrows to a large hole where various valuable objects, as well as the music box, are being kept, but they get swallowed up by the tornado of bugs. Hop Pop finds Anne and tries to apologize, but they temporarily set aside their differences when they hear the other kids screaming, and they work together to save Polly, Sprig, and the music box. Anne is still prepared to leave until Hop Pop confesses why he was so overprotective. He wasn't present when Herons attacked Wartwood, killing Sprig and Polly's parents, so he tries to be as protective as possible. Anne forgives him and he tells them about what he really knows about the Calamity Box as they agree to stick together while they head to the first temple. Hop Pop has always been overprotective of the kids, but until now the explanation has been that the kids tend to get in over their heads very frequently. The business with the Calamity Box serves as a perfect example of how Anne and the others tend to get involved in things well outside the scope of what they're capable of handling. But what makes this moment distinct from sneaking out to go swimming, for example, is the fact that what they're doing is a necessity for moving on in life. Burying the Calamity Box and lying about it wasn't just protecting the others from danger, it was protecting them against growing up. And not growing up can be dangerous as you become unprepared for real issues that appear later in life. This metaphor is given a more literal interpretation when Hop Pop, burying the box in the backyard, winds up getting Polly and Sprig into danger, as they try to rush into things too quickly to save the day. The day only needed saving because of Hop Pop's actions to prevent that exact thing. Given all of this, it's no surprise that Anne felt betrayed by him, as his fear of what might happen to his grandkids causes him to do more harm than good. But this betrayal is only heinous in the context of an old man trying to stop his grandkids from growing up, not the context given at the end of the episode when we learn all of this has happened before. If Hop Pop's paranoia was just random suspicion, then it would be far more damning of his character than if his paranoia was fear of history repeating, something based on personal experience. The First Temple. Things are awkward between Hop Pop and Anne after the events of the previous episode, but when Marcy arrives with preparations for the first temple completed, they put their argument behind them to focus on helping out on the challenges. These challenges are all based on intelligence, so Marcy is excited and confident about her ability to clear them, though when they find the temple's first room, her confidence is quickly shown as a potential hazard as she's unaware her attempts to solve the puzzle are jostling around the others. Anne dismisses this as her being in the zone, and they move on to the next challenge, a trapped floor that they have to work together to place pressure on. Anne and Hop Pop fight over who will be the one to assist Marcy, as Hop Pop wants Anne to be able to rely on him again, but Anne wants to do things without him. And the final room is a flip-wart puzzle, basically chess. As Marcy sets up the pieces, the Plantars are moved onto the board to act out the game themselves. Marcy, at first, tries to win the game without sacrificing any of her pieces, but this is made more difficult by Anne being selected as one of the opposing side's pieces. And then the other side starts to cheat, changing the rules as it goes. When Marcy sees how injured the Plantars are getting, she forfeits the game to prevent anyone from dying, and the temple leads them out, as one of the rules was that anyone attempting the puzzle only got a single try. But as they follow the arrows out of the temple, it takes them to an unassuming outhouse nearby that's transformed into the final room, with a pedestal that charges the first crystal while leading them to the next one. Anne and Hop Pop are still feuding, with Hop Pop desperate to apologize, while Anne isn't quite ready to forgive him, but they move on at least understanding that it will take time. The difference between an intelligent person and an idiot comes down to asking them a question about something they're unfamiliar with. A dumb person will make something up or deflect or try to fake as though they're smart, whereas a smart person will say, "I don't know." Even when asking somebody about something they do understand, the dumb person will confidently give a wrong answer or a half-truth, while the smart person qualifies their statements or starts a sentence with, "It depends," or "There are two schools of thought." One of the most intelligent things you can do is admit when you don't know something. This is why a temple meant to test a person's wit and intellect will end with a puzzle that can't be solved. Because as I've said before, there's no such thing as intelligence, just curiosity, and you can't be curious and egotistic at the same time. Wanting to learn more about a subject requires you to first admit you have something left to learn. And now to contradict myself, there's nothing less intelligent you can do than admitting you don't know something and then giving up, which is the exact thing the Smart Dungeon makes Marcy do to prove she is smart. Because knowing things for the sake of knowing things is not an inherently valuable skill, as you also need to learn the context of your knowledge, implementation, and what you can actually do with said skill. Marcy is quickly able to solve the first few puzzles, despite not realizing that she's put the rest of her adventuring party at risk in doing so. These were solvable puzzles that didn't require anybody to get hurt, but she didn't notice she was hurting anybody in her studies, which is why she was in danger of failing the final challenge. But in the end, Marcy was able to realize that how you gathered the knowledge can be just as important as whether you gathered the knowledge, because some things aren't worth finding out if people need to be hurt to learn them. New Wartwood. Marcy has just arrived in Wartwood, eager to introduce herself to everybody and to get to know everything she can about the town's history. But the citizens are slow to accept her, avoiding conversation and running off when confronted. So Marcy looked for a way to prove her value, and at the behest of Mayor Toadstool, she implements a series of changes to the town, including larger statues and imported marble edifices. Anne is worried that these changes are excessive, but Marcy thinks they'll lead to her acceptance, until the town starts to sink into the swamp due to exceeding the weight limit on the ground. Marcy frets that her scheme failed, but resolves to use her giant sparrow, Joe Sparrow, to pick up the pieces and stop Wartwood from sinking. She apologizes to the people who don't quite forgive her, though they do point out how similar her town-threatening antics are to Anne's, a person they have accepted. Friend or Frobo? Marcy and Hop Pop are buying seeds, leaving Anne and Sprig in charge of Polly. Polly takes advantage of the two being responsible for her to get them in trouble before going off on her own, where she struggles to do anything fun due to her height. But then she discovers a large robot, the one following them since Fort in the Road, in a pile of garbage, and she names it Frobo. Polly then orders Frobo to do all the things she can't do herself, most of which end up destroying various parts of the town, again, which causes an angry mob to form around the duo. But Frobo detects this mob's hostility towards Polly and starts to defend her with lasers and destruction, prompting Anne and Sprig to try to defend her, only to be beaten easily. So Polly jumps in the way to protect everybody, apologizing for Frobo's actions as she takes responsibility for teaching him that behavior. Frobo apologizes and the Plantars decide to adopt the robot after it wows Marcy and Hop Pop with its abilities to work the land. Just as it took Anne a while to convince the people of Wartwood to trust her, it also took a while for Marcy to earn that trust, and yet the way this trust was ultimately earned shows a bit about the expectations each character has for themselves and those around them. Anne was finally able to win over the farmer folk with consistency in their lives, and an attempt to genuinely help them out by defending them against a larger threat from the Toads. Marcy attempted to win them over by making stuff and designing new things, something she mentions as having worked when she did the same thing in Newtopia. It shows the difference in what is valued by the frogs versus the newts. Marcy's intellect is not as much of an asset with rural folks who have no need for modern amenities that don't even fit with the lifestyle they already have, literally sinking under their own weight. What they also don't have need for is a literal robot living amongst them, though Frobo is only really considered a robot for the first part of the episode. It's not until Polly realizes that Frobo is learning that she starts to view him as any more, as do the rest of the townsfolk. Polly considers Frobo to be an extension of herself that does as ordered, but she would never actually attack the rest of Wartwood, merely act like she would if they got in her way. Like a child takes after a parent, an individual taking after another won't do exactly as their guardian does. They'll just behave similarly under different circumstances. So for Polly to claim that Frobo is bad for acting like she does would be an admission that she taught him wrong. But by taking responsibility for another, she also takes responsibility for their upbringing more than their actions. Toad to redemption. Mayor Toadstool has started to come around to loving Wartwood now that the people are treating him like a hero for saving them when Toad Tower fell. But Jacinda, an emissary from Newtopia, comes into town offering Toadstool a new position where he'll be in charge of rebuilding and ruling from Toad Tower. But he'll have to leave Wartwood to accept his job, and he'll be arrested if he refuses. Toadstool asks Marcy for help in weaseling out of this commitment, and she agrees to make him look incompetent enough to have the offer rescinded without outright refusing. But each of these attempts to make Toadstool look like a coward only result in him accidentally saving the town, and Jacinda's only more impressed, until the Toads from Toad Tower enter the town, having turned brigand after Grime left. Toadstool creates a distraction, then rallies the town to fight off these toads, again, which convinces Jacinda that Toadstool would not be suited to the job because he cares too much about the frogs and the toads ruling the valley cannot be nice. She instead gives the job to Bog, one of the tax collectors from last season, because of his ruthlessness in leading the bandit group. Maddie and Marcy. Maddie is working on a resurrection spell for a client's pet when her 3 baby siblings come in, demanding to be played with before ruining the spell. Maddie tells them off, saying she doesn't want to play with them until they grow up. Then Marcy comes by, curious about Maddie's spells and curses, and the two quickly start remaking the brew from before, as Marcy is a quick learner. Meanwhile, her siblings have taken her spellbook to create a potion that will make them grow up, which actually makes them grow big. They interrupt Maddie and Marcy's ritual to play, smashing up the town the whole time, as Maddie has Marcy make a shrinking potion for her siblings and herself. She grows herself giant to have a play session with her siblings, calming the panicking kids down enough to feed them the potion that reverts them to normal. In the end, Maddie tries to apologize to her siblings, but they quickly forgive her. The frogs and toads of Amphibia are different because they were socialized differently. Toads value military prowess and loyalty to causes, while the frogs are most social, valuing hard work. This ties into Marcy's expectations of the people of Wartwood from earlier. She thought they would like her if she was useful to them in some way, rather than being trustworthy and on their side. So newts value creativity and intelligence, toads value loyalty and strength, and frogs value presumably whatever sort of trials Anne is going to have to go through for her temple in the near future. This raises the question of whether the girls' personalities were ever so pronounced in their differences before coming to Amphibia, or if coming to Amphibia turned them into the people they currently are. Sure, Sasha was a bit of a bully, but trying to kill Anne with a sword was certainly too far for what she would have done if she was still a middle schooler. So this is why Toadstool gets rejected for his promotion to Toad Tower. He's lived with the frogs for so long, he's become one in spirit, accepted by his constituents as he's proven to be loyal to them. It's not like toads are evil, they're just taught to live that way and rewarded for doing so, much in the same way that frogs aren't inherently mistrusting of outsiders, but kind when they warm up to you. That's just how things are around their parts. Also, Maddie did nothing wrong. Her siblings were actively getting in the way of her work. The Second Temple. The Plantars head to the location of the Second Temple only to find an empty field of snow with Valeriana's tent in the middle. She claims to be a member of an ancient order guarding the gems to the music box, and offers to guide them to the temple, telling them to do exactly as she says after giving them warmer coats for the cold climate. But these coats attract giant birds to their location, so Anne gets rid of hers to save the others, having to huddle for warmth afterwards. Next, an avalanche occurs, but it's not near to them, so Valeriana tells them not to worry. But Anne sees a hut in the path of the falling snow and leaves the group to check that it's empty. Valeriana tells her off for ignoring her directions, and Anne tells her she's heartless. And then the newt transports both of them to a platform in the middle of space, where she proceeds to point out all of the selfish things Anne has done since the first season. Anne confesses that all of these are true, but still wants to charge the stone anyway to get her friends back, to which Valeriana agrees, as true heart comes from humility. The stone starts charging, but Anne takes it before it's done after hearing her friends scream, though this was just because they were watching videos on Marcy's phone, and they all return home as the second gem flickers. Beryl's Warhammer. Grime and Sasha are preparing to make their case for an overhaul of the newt-centric political system to the Toads from the other towers, but the other Toads in charge reject the idea as they don't want to follow Grime after his disgrace. But the Toad in charge wakes up, or resurrects, long enough to say that the Toads will only follow someone who can bring back the legendary Beryl's Warhammer. Grime, Sasha, and the 2 remaining Toads loyal to him head out to find this Warhammer, coming up with a signal to use in case they get in over their heads. They find the hammer, but it won't budge no matter how much force they use, and their efforts to dislodge it wake up the giant narwhal worm whose head it's still inside of. Percy and Braddock signal to turn around and leave, but Sasha ignores their pleas to climb atop the beast and start steering it. She manages to ride the beast back to the tower where the other Toads have gathered, unable to stop it until the pink light in her eyes powers up the Warhammer enough to dislodge it, and then they're able to knock out the beast before it collides. Sasha throws the Warhammer into the tower, and the Toads all agree to follow Grime into battle, all but Percy and Braddock, who abandon the cause because Sasha wouldn't listen to them. The second temple is the temple meant to challenge Anne's sense of heart, her ability to do the right thing and be a good person. Except, both of those things are effectively impossible, or rather so difficult to define as to be useless to even attempt to do so. What does it really mean to be a good person? Does that mean you're doing good things all the time, or that you only do things you think are good? And who are these actions good for? Does every action you perform have to be to help someone else out, or can you be self-interested every so often? Do you have to apologize every time you're not totally deferent to another person? The more you get hung up on right versus wrong, typically the less time you spend actually doing anything that benefits anyone. Many people end up failing to improve lives because they focus too hard on doing nothing wrong instead of doing something right. This is ultimately what the second temple was testing, not so much Anne's mentality, but her morality in the simplest of terms. She is told she needs to find a way home for herself and her friends, and the only way to do this is to listen to Valeriana, and then she ignores the woman to instead help out people or save others. Thinking pragmatically about doing the most good or whatever can only get you so far. Heart has far more to do with your gut reactions to a moral quandary than it does with clear and concise thinking. Sasha was able to compliment Toads to her side by flattering them until they believed the two were working towards the same goal. But when push came to shove, Sasha cared more about end goals than about the path to get there. Percy and Braddock both tried to tap out of the mission, but Sasha knew she could still finish it and that it wasn't worth turning back by that point. But the right thing to do and the correct thing to do are sometimes not the same, and Sasha failed to tell the difference here, thinking about what's best in the long term to the point that she ignored the well-being of her allies. Bessie and Michelangelo. The Plantars are preparing for their excursion to the third temple as Marcy gives Anne a makeover so she can be better equipped. She brings in a fashion designer from Newtopia to handle this makeover, but all the costumes are far too elaborate for Anne's tastes, with Anne eventually stating she's happy with how she looks now and doesn't want to change anything about that. Meanwhile, Hop Pop has put Bessie in charge of watching over Michelangelo, Polly's snail from Hopping Mall, though Michelangelo keeps wandering into danger, forcing Bessie to chase after him. When knocking over some of the supplies during a rescue catches the attention of Hop Pop, he locks her up in the stable, only for a misfire by one of Anne's costumes to start a chain reaction threatening to ignite the Plantars' supply of explosives. Bessie helps Michelangelo to fix it, even breaking out to rescue him when he's grabbed by a passing bird, and they save the day together, convincing Hop Pop to give her a little more freedom. The Third Temple. The Plantars arrive at the Third Temple, the door of which has to be opened by Frobo as it's too heavy for any of them. The first trial is a straightforward battle against giant lava worms using weapons that are too heavy for any of them to lift with ease, and they're nearly defeated until the group is saved by Sasha, who followed them to the temple. Sasha says she followed them there to apologize for what happened at Toad Tower and that she wants them to trust her again, something Marcy does immediately, though Anne's still hesitant to do so. But after Sasha straightforwardly solves the next challenge as the others are looking for hints on what to do, they enter the final room, a fight against a giant who can manipulate gravity. They're too weak to fight back against this giant, even Sasha, until Anne criticizes her for being manipulative, not only recently but since they first met. Despite this, Anne still tries to motivate and encourage Sasha, who's able to stand up again, shedding her cape and slashing the giant to restore gravity. They manage to fully charge the Calamity Box together, though Marcy convinces them not to open it until they return to Newtopia later. Once everybody prepares to leave, Sasha and Grime discuss their ongoing plans, as Sasha brags that they all fell for her lie. The third temple tests strength, not merely physical strength, but challenges about endurance and the like as well. The first challenge is a purely physical one: lift a heavy object and swing it really hard while moving. The second is all about being straightforward. While Marcy and Anne immediately begin to look for some sort of shortcut or a less obvious solution, Sasha just lifts the weight and moves on. Then the final challenge tests not decisiveness or raw strength, but continuing strength against an enemy who becomes harder and harder to fight or dodge. It's not about hitting really hard, but continuing to hit, even when it becomes too difficult to keep doing so. And the way that Sasha's able to motivate herself to keep fighting is, strangely enough, the power of friendship. We've seen a few secretive conversations between Grime and Sasha that imply she's planning a betrayal against the people she's pretending to be nice to, so the audience knows, or at least suspects, she's still a villain. Despite this, she gets to be powered up by a heroic trope in seeing her friends root for her. If she didn't care about them and just wanted to use them for personal gain, then she should not have cared what Anne thought and shouldn't have been affected by her encouragement. So Sasha will still have scenes where she says she's a villain, only to turn around and use the language of a traditional protagonist. The dinner. The Plantars host Sasha and Grime at a dinner party to celebrate the trio getting back together again. But Sprig and the others don't trust anyone else quite yet, as they still remember the events of Toad Tower too well. Anne tries to convince them that Sasha has changed, but a cutaway shows that Sasha has not, and resents pretending to be nice to fool the others. The party begins, with Grime bringing over a chocolate volcano that will rise through the night as a dessert, and they begin to have a conversation filled with several faux pas, such as Hop Pop telling an anti-Toad joke, and Grime discussing exploiting the frogs. Later, at a game of charades, Sasha gets overly competitive while insulting Sprig, and when Anne tries to get her to calm down, the chocolate volcano goes off, covering the floor in lava, as angry hornets come out of the cake. Grime's paralyzed by their venom, and the girls have to work together to bait the bugs into attacking, then firing their own stingers back at them. Once the situation is under control, Grime wakes up and shows them that the hardening lava bugs are made of chocolate. Sasha tells Anne that she has not changed because she doesn't want to, though she does agree to recognize how the other girls don't need her protection as much as before. Battle of the Bands. Mayor Toadstool announces a battle of the bands to take people's minds off the tension of Sasha and Grime being in their town. The girls are prepared to get their old garage band back together, with Sasha unveiling her old song, Heart Stomper, though Anne would prefer to play her new song, No Big Deal. Sasha agrees to play the new song, but only if she can make several changes to it, and when these changes are vetoed, Sasha leaves the band to start out on her own. She finds Toady by himself, offering to tell him what to do because he's aimless without Toadstool, and the two proceed to practice together. But during this practice, he tells her how nice it is not to be in control of everything all at once, and Sasha starts to second-guess her behavior. The night of the contest arrives as Marcy and Anne start playing their song, only for Sasha to come out on stage in the middle to help them out. They're finally happy to be back together, even if the contest is won by Grime playing a harp solo, and they end the night by taking a group photo with all their friends from Wartwood. I've explained before that Sasha is an antagonist written with the author's language of a protagonist, and this leaves her open to unique character development, where she can be either one depending on what the narrative is best supported by. This episode gives a bit of additional depth as to why she behaves the way that she does. Prior to entering Amphibia, Sasha was nice to the others, helping them out even when it seemed too difficult to do, and then leading them around on fun adventures, for her personal definition of fun. She was controlling, but this was not out of a desire to dominate others. It was because she didn't want them to hurt themselves out of inaction, if nothing else. She's doing the wrong thing, but it's for the right reasons, at least reasons she can justify and things she can downplay. But the reason this mentality doesn't work anymore is because the people she's controlling are stronger than before, while her methods are also getting more extreme. The toads that Sasha appeared near lived in a very militaristic society and were used to taking orders and listening to others rather than deciding things for themselves, so Sasha fit in with them. But Anne and Marcy are not like toads, such as Toadie, who enjoy being pushed around because it's all they know. They've become more independent, and no longer need a person to lead by anything other than example. It's up to Sasha whether she acknowledges these changes in the future or not. I've heard a bit about the Season 2 finale being a big twist, so I'm writing this part just before watching it. I mean, I'm still going to record that part afterwards by a day at least, but still. True Colors. The episode begins with Marcy discovering the music box back in the human realm, texting the idea to retrieve it to the others after an argument with her parents. The Plantars finally enter Newtopia again, with Grime and Sasha in disguise, hoping to get pardons for their assistance in recharging the music box. But before they can hand the box to Andreas, Grime steals it, with Sasha threatening to destroy it unless Andreas surrenders to her. She explains she would rather stay in Amphibia to rule than go home to be nobody again, attempting to send them back without her, but she's unable to operate the box herself, and so she has the rest arrested as a Toad army approaches the gates. But angry about the betrayal, Anne attacks the guards and they escape with the help of General Yunan and Olivia, hiding out in cells where they plan on how to free Andreas using Hop Pop's acting, take out the guards using Frobo, and close the gate with Anne and Sprig working together. While redecorating the castle, Sasha and Grime uncover evidence that Andreas was a conqueror rather than the affable guy he pretended to be, and when Sasha sees Anne and Sprig closing the gates, they rush out to stop them. Anne fights off Sasha, ignoring her warnings as she no longer trusts her or considers Sasha as a friend. The Toad invasion is stopped and they finally return to the throne room where Andreas prepares to use the Calamity Box for its intended purpose, not merely traveling back to the human realm, but to invade other realms as well, as his ancestors were conquerors. He places the Calamity Box on a pedestal, and the castle detaches from the ground, revealed to be an airship, and the robot factories across Amphibia come back to life and begin to launch another army at the castle. Marcy pleads with Andreas not to hurt the others as he promised he wouldn't, and Andreas reveals the truth behind the flashback at the start of the episode. Marcy got the trio trapped in Amphibia on purpose so she wouldn't have to leave the state with her family. The groups gathered prepare to face off against Andreas and his robot army, with Polly eventually grabbing the Calamity Box after she grows her legs, though Andreas ends up winning the fight by threatening to drop Sprig out of the castle, which he does anyway after the box is returned. Assuming Sprig is dead, Anne's eyes begin to glow as she becomes powered up enough to fight off Andreas himself, though she's only able to hold the form long enough to give Marcy a chance to grab the box and open the portal home. But before she can enter, Andreas stabs Marcy through the chest, with the portal closing as she drops the box. Anne and the Plantars appear in the human realm as a post-credit sequence assures us that Marcy's still alive. True colors, as in the real personality of each of the major players in the plot, as well as the real colors of the box being together at last. We've seen these sort of betrayals in this plot before from other characters, so there's a baseline of what to expect the consequences to be. Hop Pop once sabotaged Anne's attempts to get back home because he cared about her, his actions being forgiven because he was doing what he thought was best, enough proof to make it believable to himself. Marcy got the trio stranded in Amphibia in the first place, but justifies it by saying that she was trying to get them to stick together, though this is harder to justify given that they wound up separated and all the good parts of Amphibia came after the fact. Sure, it was nice that Anne met the Plantars and found a new family, but Marcy had no way of knowing that would happen, and it was just as likely they would have ended up eating bugs in a cave for the next several months. The good that came out of her plan was all accidental and not part of some great scheme, or even things that the others were asked about beforehand. but this is explained away as a character flaw rather than an active attempt to harm the others, as the bad parts of the Calamity Box, taking them away, were also accidental. Season 2 Retrospective. Just as the first season ended with Anne achieving one goal while getting further from another, the second season ends with the opposite. She finally gets back home only to have traveled home without her friends by her side, nor is she sure they're really her friends anymore. Anne finally decides she's had enough of trusting Sasha, and refuses to listen the one time she's actually telling the truth about Andreas, not that it would have mattered much to listen to him. The two people who both knew how to operate the music box both had no intention of using it for good, as Marcy knew Andreas had some plans for it and merely wanted herself and her friends out of it, while Andreas betrayed her and everyone else. We've seen this sort of betrayal before from characters like Sasha, who was willing to play dirty so many times that at a certain point, you don't blame other Toads for walking out on her when she inevitably stops caring about their concerns. If someone's willing to lie to one person, they're willing to lie to everybody. But it's a matter of trust in some cases that an authority figure can lie in the interest of making things better. After all, the start of the finale had Anne and Marcy attempt to lie to get Sasha and Grime into the city so they could help prove a point. The moral difference comes down to who they're lying to as well as who they're lying for. If you're lying to a person with more power to help out someone else, then it can be construed as a good thing. If you're lying to someone with less power to help yourself, then you've lost a sense of trustworthiness, and others ought to be aware that you have no real loyalty. It's neat to see how Anne was able to get her powers back from the music box when she thought Sprig was in danger, as thinking her family was in danger was the very reason she didn't fully charge the gym in the first place, retaining some attachment to its power. Once again, Andreas has tried to make a deal with the person not only to not uphold his end of the bargain. Sprig was even trying to convince the others to let him drop instead of returning the music box, as in some way he had to have known that the king was always going to try to kill him anyway. And because he's betrayed people so many times out of self-interest, it comes as shocking but not surprising when he stabs Marcy to stop her from leaving. Part of the reason why Andreas was able to play a convincing ally was because acting evil had no immediate benefit for most of the second season. He was affable because it was advantageous to be kind. He was never really put into a position to have his resolve tested the way others were, like Sasha. Sasha wound up with the Toads, and manipulating them has always gotten her what she wanted. Hurting her own allies gets her a new warhammer and control of the Toad Tower, while saving the day got her a job as a lieutenant alongside Grime. She does good if doing good is good for her, and Andreas is the same way. It's only when the opportunity to act in your own interests arises and a person rejects it that their resolve is really tested. Nice people are nice all the time, not just nice when others are nice to them first. The new normal. Anne and the Plantars are back in LA, and the first thing Anne wants to do is go home to her family. She tries to keep the frogs a secret from them, though Hop Pop mishears her signal and she's forced to drop a lot of information on them at once. Given that, her parents decide to keep the family on lockdown, as Anne doesn't want the government to know about frog people. But after a few days of quarantine, the Plantars are itching to get out of the house, and Anne asks her parents to allow them to visit the market in disguise. While shopping there, her parents start to notice how differently Anne is behaving, far more responsible than before, and they admit that she's more mature than she was before she left. But while they're out shopping, a Frobot sent by Andreas to destroy Anne and prevent her from warning of his invasion attacks them while cloaked. The Plantars are able to fight back, though they and the robot are held back by their unwillingness to get caught by the people nearby. So to avoid being seen, Anne lures the Frobot into the freezer where the Plantars are frozen, and when they're about to be blasted, she's able to use her glowing blue powers to defeat it, with the attacker fleeing into the horizon. Due to Anne being knocked out by her use of the powers, she decides to avoid using them later if she can, as they all head back home. The opening to Season 3 is a parallel to the opening episodes of Season 1 in the sense that it's about characters being transported to a world they're unfamiliar with and steadily getting used to the new challenges. Also in common are plots about trying to lay low due to the negative reaction the natives may have to seeing the new guys. Humans would predictably freak out at the sight of frog people. This time, the authority figures are the Boonchoys, while Anne is halfway between authority and the one who needs to be monitored. The same role Sprig served before as both the ambassador and ally to Anne while she navigated a new world. But as the first season introduced the world of Amphibia first before introducing the outsider, this season can't do the same as the new setting is not something unknown to audiences. This setting being LA, the most city, Earth city imaginable for a Western audience. The characters are also all characters we know from before, or are at least far more capable of being introduced to us, as we've had Anne explain them to us already. The Boonchoy adults are introduced on top of that by having them serve a similar role to Hop Pop from back in Season 1. So the only things that are introduced are the new things that need to be introduced, and one of these new things is the personality of Anne. Placing her into a similar situation as we've seen before allows the audience to draw a comparison between her old and current behaviors. The immaturity she showed and the selfishness, compounding with the unfamiliarity of Amphibia, are not the same as she is now, trying to be a better person than she was before. So the opener of Season 3 intentionally draws comparison to the opener of Season 1, but instead of introducing a new setting, it introduces a new character, Anne, not to be confused with Anne. Hop till you drop. The Plantars are getting into various forms of trouble as Polly keeps picking fights with kids, Sprig keeps trying to touch everything, and Hop Pop keeps nearly falling for scams. So to better ease them into the human realm, Anne takes the Plantars to the local mall, where she gives them a trial by fire. Polly has to assemble a teddy bear without fighting anyone, Sprig must walk through a mall exhibit without touching anything, and Hop Pop has to walk by the booths without buying anything. She monitors them from the second story until an old friend catches up to her and tries to explain the last 5 months of gossip. While Anne is distracted, Sprig starts to touch everything, accidentally disassembling a piece that begins to roll through the halls. Polly gets mad at the babies grabbing her doll and fights them, only for the moms in the store to go after her. And Hop Pop dives into the wishing fountain to take the money, only to get chased out by mall security. Anne gets away from her old friend to rescue the Plantars from themselves, redirecting the mall cop to the moms while grabbing Sprig from the art. She apologizes for giving them too much to do at once, but they point out that she had a similar experience in Amphibia too. Turning point. Sasha and Grime escape from Andreas's attacks shortly after Anne and the Plantars left Amphibia, and they fly away on Joe Sparrow to find somewhere safe to hide out. Grime chooses Wartwood, making up a lie about the two being sent there by Anne while she's away on a mission, and the citizens believe this fib as they welcome the two who stay in the Plantar family farm. Sasha feels guilty about lying once again, especially when a Frobot attacks the two, sending out a beacon for reinforcements after it's destroyed. Grime prepares to leave Wartwood, but Sasha comes clean to them as she doesn't want the town abandoned to an invasion. She defends them against a giant Frobot, eventually joined by Grime, who doesn't want to see his friend left behind, and they are soon joined by the rest of Wartwood. Once the robots are all destroyed, the people of Wartwood forgive Sasha, saying that Anne wasn't too different from her. As I've said before, the difference between a good person and a bad person is a comparison between pragmatic logic versus emotional righteousness. A bad person does whatever benefits them, even if the thing that most benefits them is good behavior, while a good person doesn't bother to think about the long-term repercussions of what they're doing. If it will help, they do it. If it messes things up in the future, they'll just save the day again. Normally, Sasha's been a very pragmatic person. She cares about her friends, but only up to the point where doing a favor for them benefits herself too. But here she lies to a bunch of strangers and then defends them from an invasion she directed their way, despite assuming they all hate her. And this is more or less the same story we saw back in Toadcatcher, when Anne felt like Wartwood hated her, only to stand up for them anyway. So part of the reason this episode works as a redemption story for Sasha is because she is following in the footsteps of the protagonistic characters, rather than simply apologizing or trying to find some other way to prove she has changed. As I've said before, there's a stark difference between doing what's right and doing what's correct, and Sasha's finally trying to do what's right. Tie feud. Sprig has made himself at home in the Boonchoy household, though the other Plantars think he's being rude by acting like he isn't a guest. So to become a Boonchoy in the same way Anne became a Plantar, Sprig decides to follow Anne to work at her parents' restaurant to prove he's one of them. But he mostly just gets in the way. When Ned, the restaurant's best customer, tries once again to convince the others to give him their recipes for his food truck, Sprig takes matters into his own hands, only to cause a scene outside the restaurant that Anne gets in trouble for. Undeterred, Sprig attempts to destroy the food truck by luring Ned away, only for Anne to get caught barreling down the road with him when she attempts to stop him. They both manage to stop the truck by using up its momentum at a skate park, only for Ned and Miss Spoonchoy to catch up to scold the others. But after an apology from Sprig, Miss Spoonchoy decides to accept him into the family by yelling at him, while Ned is given a job running deliveries. Adventures in cat-sitting. It's been a week since the Plantars have started staying with the Boonchoys, and fearing that he's becoming a burden or a freeloader, Hop Pop tries to come up with some way to pull his own weight. The Plantars eventually get the opportunity to help out when Domino 1 needs to be taken to the vet while Anne is away at the dentist's. They attempt to take the bus, but are kicked off when Hop Pop tries to use his tongue to steady them, scrambling around the city before finally making it there. But while they're drilling the vet about care for frogs, Domino ends up escaping, and out of options, Sprig calls Mr. Boonchoy to help them. He tells him Domino loves shawarma, and they head to the nearest restaurant, where Hop Pop imitates a fire alarm to get people out, while Polly mimics a ball of yarn to lure Domino back into the crate. Mr. Boonchoy shows up and gets him away from the scene, as Hop Pop apologizes for being too much of a burden, to which he reminds the Plantars they took his daughter in for 5 months, so they'll never owe anything to them. Sprig wishes he was a part of the family just in the same way that Ned wishes he was a part of the family. Both of these characters aren't actually being treated as one for the same reason. They want to be treated like family, but don't actually want to do the emotional legwork to treat the others the same way. Family in this show's a nebulous term. Actual blood relationships matter far less than the time people spend together. So whether or not two people are family has less to do with the excessive praise and kindness they give, but more the painful emotional lessons. It's the difference between pampering a guest and scolding a child. There is also a difference between being a guest at somebody's house and being a member of their family, and this is a difference that Hop Pop is afraid of being on the wrong side of, due to his appreciation of what the Boonchoys have done for them. Except being a member of somebody's family comes with the same benefits and costs as it did back in Amphibia. To be someone's family means that your relationship is no longer transactional. Family does favor for each other's without expecting something in return because they just want their loved ones to be happy. But to really be family, this relationship does still have to go both ways. Not in the sense that you're paying people back, but in the sense that you help because you want to, and are helped for the same reason. Hop Pop wanting to pay back the Boonchoys is enough to make him one of the family. It doesn't actually matter if he helps out or not, so long as he wanted to. Because after all, that's the same way he treated Anne in the first season. Fight at the museum. Anne has pulled multiple all-nighters studying ways to get the frogs back to Amphibia, though her mother would rather she study for the months of school she's missed by going to the museum to write a report. Anne tries to research through the museum trip until they discover a vase with a depiction of the Calamity Box and a bipedal frog. A museum employee named Dr. Jan offers to tell them more about this vase, but Anne turns her down, saying they can't trust just anybody with this information. So that night, they sneak into the museum to steal the artifact for themselves to do further investigations. But while taking out the security cameras, they catch the attention of the Frobot from before, who rushes over to stop them. Anne and the Plantars are able to use some of the museum exhibits to injure the Frobot, eventually dropping a model dinosaur on top of it. This gets the attention of Jan and the security guards, and seeing the bipedal frogs, Jan lies about a performance so she can talk to the Plantars directly. Anne's hesitant to make an agreement with her, but Hop Pop insists that they trust somebody with the information because they won't get back home alone. Temple frogs. Anne has received word from Dr. Jan that she's discovered something about the vase, but before she can go see her, Miss Boonchoy informs her that the family's making a trip to the Thai temple for market day, and she needs to go with them for at least an hour. The Plantars travel along, heading to the various events around the temple, where Polly shows off the Thai she's learned from the Boonchoys, Hop Pop gets into performing con dancing, and Sprig gets into kick volleyball. Realizing the Plantars are having a good time at the temple, Anne decides to go to the museum on her own, but she gets caught by her mother on the way out, who scolds her for abandoning the Thai community after they supported the Boonchoys during their moment of need. Anne realizes she owes something to the Thai community, and then a swarm of drones sent by the Frobot attacks her and the others. She tries to keep them inside for safety, but the people refuse to hide, fighting alongside the Plantars. They come out victorious, but the disguises are broken in the scuffle, though the Thai folk don't mind, as a friend of the Boonchoys is a friend of theirs. Dr. Jan makes it to the temple, not able to wait to show off the amphibian language she found on the vase about seeking out an olm. As it took a while for the frogs of Wartwood to warm up to Anne's presence, there's an assumption that it will take some time for the humans of Earth to warm up to the Plantars, so she tries to do what she can to slowly ease them into the world and vice versa, assuming she introduces them to anyone at all. Season 3 has been a reverse of Season 1 up to this point, so the way to introduce new concepts is through their differences to the stories we've already seen. Wartwood was slow to accept them at first, but the first person outside the family to meet the Plantars was excited about meeting frog people and eager to help out. It was only Anne's previous experience that made her think otherwise, and this thinking convinced her it was more reasonable to break into a museum instead of talking to an expert who was eager to infodump about a way back home. After learning that not everybody is going to be as skeptical of her new family as the frogs once were of her, she takes them to meet even more of the people she grew up with, the Thai community. It's revealed by Miss Boonchoy that the Thai community rallied to the Boonchoys when their daughter went missing and helped with cooking and the like, and given this kindness, it's not a surprise they would keep helping when she got back. This parallels the way that Wartwood was willing to rally around Anne because they wanted to help the Plantars who they knew. After all, the friend of a friend must also be a friend. Fixing Frobo. The Plantars are busy watching cat videos on the internet while Polly's at work fixing up Frobo. Her attempts are hardly successful, getting Frobo online enough to indiscriminately blast lasers before Anne shuts him off and Hop-Pop forbids Polly from continuing to work with the robot. Polly ignores this request to find more information about robots online, discovering the IT Gals, two mechanical influencers, and she gets advice from them on how to rebuild her robot, though once again she ignores the advice not to power him up indoors and makes the final changes. But Frobo, when repaired, only returns to his factory settings and begins flying up to a higher vantage point with Polly on his head before he runs out of fuel. While the two are in freefall, Polly reminds Frobo of who she is, and he comes to just enough to place Polly inside his chassis to protect her from the impact. Polly survives, as does Frobo's head, just in time for the It Girls, concerned that one of their callers was about to power up a robot in her garage, to arrive and assist her in rebuilding. Anne-sterminator. Anne decides it's finally time to come clean to her family about everything that happened in Amphibia, including the fact that King Andreas is planning to kill her and invade. But she's interrupted by the Frobot returning after Andreas gave it 24 hours to finish the job. It shows up at the Boonchoy house to attack, only to get confused by the shrine to Anne her mother built in the house. The family flees in the van, getting chased down the highway by the Frobot as Anne tries to fight it off with her tennis racket. They eventually wind up at the junkyard where Anne's parents scold her for not really growing up because she is still keeping so much from them. But when the Frobot attacks again, they work together to fight it off by having Anne's mom make more fakes before she stabs it in an ambush with the rest of the family. The Frobot prepares to explode to take them all out at once, but Anne uses her blue powers to throw it into the sky. In the end, she decides to be more upfront about everything involving Andreas as the episode ends on the FBI investigating footage of the chase scene. It's a bit strange to find out that there's an extra-dimensional king with an army of robots at his command intent on invading Earth from a land where two of your friends are still trapped, and not to try to tell anybody about it. It's a bit weirder to get upset with a middle schooler for knowing all this information and not handling the knowledge well, but maybe that's the point. If Anne really was mature enough, she would have handled the information in a more pragmatic way. Then again, this information is far from a realistic situation. It's not like adults regularly deal with what are basically frog aliens. In fact, if Anne had led with the frog people invasion headed to Earth, then people, even her family, would probably just have assumed some sort of brain injury. Anne refusing to warn her family about the incoming Frobot invasion was really just a delay of the inevitable, but it also parallels Hop-Pop burying the Calamity Box and his other attempts at protecting his grandkids from reality, only to make them less prepared for it. So even though she was wrong, it's hard to act as though she's a bad person for not warning those closest to her. Mr. X. A federal agent named Mr. X is tracking the Boonchoys after connecting them to the frogs he's found, and with the aid of his assistant Jenny, tracks them to the family restaurant, and later to Anne's location. The Boonchoys try to call Anne while following the agent to the movie theater, but Anne doesn't hear the call until Mr. X has already reached them. The Plantars try to hide as the Boonchoys reach the outside of the theater, and Anne insists that they don't come inside as she claims she can handle it on her own. But Mr. X calls for backup, who surround the entire theater, as Anne is still planning on taking on the agent 4-against-1. So her parents make a plan of their own to cut the power and swap out the Plantars with Earth Frogs just before the agents break into the stall Anne was hiding in. The rest of the FBI laughs at RuPaul's frog theory, as the Boonchoys escape thanks to the power of a tracking device they had on Hop Pop. Sprig's birthday. Anne finds out it's Sprig's birthday, and that on Amphibia they celebrate birthdays with a crown and a short moment of self-reflection. But because they're on Earth, Anne insists on throwing Sprig an Earth birthday party, getting on her bike and taking him around the city for a variety of activities. On their way back from the observatory, Anne asks Sprig if it was his best birthday yet, but he only places it at number 3. So Anne tries to make the day even better by taking him up in a hot air balloon, but this is cancelled when high winds start up, and they agree to simply sit in the basket. The high winds then blow the balloon away, and they end up sailing through LA, terrifying various people with the creepy clown balloon before it nears a construction site. Anne and Sprig have to jump from the balloon before it pops, landing in a dumpster where Anne apologizes for not making it a great birthday. But Sprig points out that it was still great, as the only two that were better were the day he was born and the year he got his iconic hat from his parents. Anne is once again trying to prevent her family from getting involved in her attempts to keep the Plantars safe and get them all home. As usual, she's gotten in over her head trying to solve problems by herself, not only retreading her character arcs of rushing into things she can't handle, but also mimicking a few of Hop Pop's character flaws, as he tries too much to protect those closest to him, without realizing that they have things they can offer as well. Anne has spent so much time away from her family that she's forgotten how much they've done for her before, partially why she's matured so much being the fact that she's had to fill in these gaps on her own. But spending time away from her parents has also given her the chance to learn from others too. But returning home hasn't also inverted these character dynamics, but swapped who gets involved in what plots as well. Season 3 is starting to show more and more episodic scripts as characters will do things like celebrate a birthday party, whereas back in Season 1, Anne had the excuse of being unable to leave the valley due to weather and the Toad Towers. In Season 3, there's not much of an excuse to ignore the ticking clock of Andreas building up a robot army in the background, but maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about taking a pragmatic approach to stopping a villain from going after your loved ones, and maybe the time she spends with the Plantars during these few weeks is what the fight was all about. Spider-Sprig. Inspired by a superhero movie, Sprig decides to don a self-made costume to become Frogman, so he can patrol for crime around the neighborhood and be accepted by the people of Earth. He soon encounters Robert Otto, a community patrol officer who believes he's also a hero patrolling the neighborhood. Sprig starts to get people's attention when he saves a bus full of kids, including Otto's granddaughter, Molly Jo, as more and more people start to praise the young frog instead. But while in the junkyard from Anne-sterminator, Otto finds the Frobot's arm and equips it, and he decides to take out Frogman himself. Their battle has a ton of collateral damage, including nearly injuring Molly Jo, who recognizes and tells off her grandfather as well as Sprig for their selfishness and carelessness. The two heroes realize she's right and begin repairing the damage to the city together, with Sprig leaping into the sunset before retiring the Frogman persona. Olivia and Yunan. Olivia has a flashback to when she explained her promise to her mother, to Marcy, that she would protect the land and all its inhabitants. In the present, Olivia and Yunan are called to speak with Andreas, briefly watching him talk to himself before they're told to expand drilling operations. Unhappy with the state of their land and their leader, the duo decides to recruit help by rescuing Marcy, who's being held underneath the castle. They head to the secret rooms from last season's Slumber Party to End All Slumber Parties, where they find Marcy in a tank in a room full of eyes. but when they try to remove her from the tank, the three find themselves outside, confronted by their worst fears. Marcy figures out it's just a simulation, and Yunan discovers the eyes are projectors as they work together to smash them all and appear back at the castle. But Andrea stops them from leaving, introducing them to the Core. The Core is a collection of the greatest minds in Amphibia stored digitally, and seeking a new host, choosing Marcy due to her intellect. Marcy is strapped to a chair and possessed by the Core. The difference between Anne's time in Amphibia and Sprig's time on Earth comes down to whether these characters were given the chance to acclimate to the new environment. Anne eventually started to get involved with Wartwood as the people there slowly warmed up to her, but due to the fact that the frogs have been threatened with giant robots and government scientists and so on, it's far more dangerous for the Plantars to start trying to acclimate to American society. The threats to their lives are not wild animals trying to eat them for survival, but entire government systems who can't tolerate their existence as they want to learn more or because they want to stop others from learning their plans. And now these others include the Core, a collection of minds that seems to be communicating with Andreas in some way. He went from an affable king to a cold, calculating villain to subservient and deferring to some higher power, as if these minds have really been pulling the strings all along. The fact that the Core wanted Marcy's mind for the same reason that Yunan and Olivia wanted her on their side indicates this isn't a decided conflict, though. Despite the actions Andreas has taken with the Calamity Box being a scheme centuries in the making, I think centuries, the arrival of the humans in Amphibia still seems to be a deciding factor in whether these schemes actually come to fruition. From the help the Plantars have been getting on Earth, though, it also seems as if the arrival of frogs on Earth could be equally impactful if only Anne would accept the help. Hollywood Hop Pop. Anne is taking the Plantars to Hollywood to look around when Hop Pop gets out of the tour bus to go see more. He finds a line for an audition seeking older men, and he meets Humphrey Westwood, who kindly offers Hopediah his spot in line. Hop Pop gets the part by naming a new catchphrase, and by the next day he's all over merchandise and TV screens. This includes a screen belonging to Mr. X, who sets out to track down Hopediah after realizing he's one of the frogs. This leads to a chase scene through a film studio, including several cameos from Suspicion Island characters and the like, before winding up at the tower where Hop Pop's next big role is. But when he runs into Humphrey working there as a janitor, he offers to swap with the guy to repay the kindness and get away from Mr. X. Mr. X bursts into the building to capture Hopediah only to have grabbed the wrong guy again, as Hop Pop and the Plantars leave the studio with the old man deciding he wants to direct instead. If you give a frog a cookie. The Plantars are feeling homesick, making mud puddles and building miniature models of Wartwood to feel better. Anne gets a call from Dr. Jan about an interdimensional scientist named Dr. Frakes, though she wants to finish the vetting process before telling them about the frogs. But hoping to cheer up the Plantars, she looks up this Dr. Frakes herself and finds a scientist running a children's museum. She lies to get past her assistant Terry for an interview, where they meet an eccentric scientist who has a functioning portal, explained as her having created one by analyzing the energy signature from the Calamity Box first being used. To keep the Plantars happy, Anne asks her to activate this portal, which only opens up for a second and not even on their dimension, and the blast from the activation reveals the trio as frogs. Frakes kidnaps the Plantar family and takes them to her lab for dissection. Terry teams up with Anne to save them, giving up her career to stop her boss from cutting open these frogs. They save the Plantars by tossing Anne's cookies to a crowd of hungry kids and then ride into the sunset, while Terry volunteers to work on a portal herself. Thus far, almost everybody who has had the opportunity to meet the Plantars has found them charming and served to be an ally, the obvious exception being Mr. X, who is trying to hunt them down, although it's questionable whether he can be considered to have met the Plantars, as all he really knows is of them. So this episode introduces the first character to serve as an antagonist who wasn't from Amphibia, introduced purely because Anne was tired of bad news and dead ends. The frogs have been getting along well on Earth, but only in the short bursts Anne has ever really allowed them the freedom to get along with others. Tired of hurting their feelings by shooting down all their progress, Anne attempts to force progress, getting the family in over their heads as she pursues new avenues of getting home without double-checking that they're legit first. This is the same flaw she had back in the first few seasons, and so connecting this character flaw from before with an attempt to go back to the locations from before implies that Anne's character growth thus far is actually making things harder on the others. The Plantar family does not simply miss their home in Wartwood, but they miss their family from Wartwood too, and that includes the old Anne. Froggy Little Christmas. Miss Boonchoy is given an offer to make a parade float in the holiday parade, but she turns it down as she wants to help the Plantars to keep a low profile. But as it's always been Miss Boonchoy's dream to participate, Anne decides to make the family's float in secret by recruiting the help of various allies they've made in the last few weeks. While she's going around the city recruiting this help, the Plantars ask these people what the meaning of the holidays really is, only to get differing answers from each one, answers that convince Sprig he needs to give Anne the perfect gift, or he'll ruin Christmas. They begin working on the float while Mr. Boonchoy looks for the perfect, candid shot of the family for their card, eventually revealing their preparations to Miss Boonchoy, who's happy as she feels like participating in the parade means she's finally made it in America, rather than just being viewed as an immigrant. Back in Amphibia, King Andreas has received a new type of weaponized drone from his researchers that he's eager to test out so he can destroy Anne in the human realm. After a few days of searching and construction, Andreas' drone finally finds the Boonchoys in the middle of the parade, and he has the robot possess a giant Santa to begin the attack. They run from this giant Santa, which most people just think is part of the show, until they're backed into a corner. With nothing left to throw, the Plantars shoot a firework containing the flaming tree at Santa, blowing him up and preventing any further destruction. The Plantars, even more confused about the meaning of the holiday, finally get an answer from Anne that Christmas isn't really about anything but what you think it's about. Sprig gives a self-made action figure to Anne, and she writes to the families of Sasha and Marcy, telling them their daughters are still alive. Throughout this episode, the Plantars keep asking people what the meaning of Christmas is, getting different answers from everyone they ask. This is a holiday special cliché that audiences are used to the point where it's not really questioned when Rebecca Sugar sings the answer towards the end as the most correct interpretation is given. But this episode also goes out of its way to subvert that expectation by having the meaning of the holiday explained as whatever you think it is. For example, when Dr. Jan is asked about the meaning of Christmas, she goes into a long rant about the history of the holiday and its roots in various midwinter holidays in the past, from Saturnalia to the modern day. Her explanation of what the holiday actually is does little to properly answer any of the questions asked by the Plantar family, because the frogs have already seen these celebrations and preparations, none of which can be immediately or simply connected to the parade floats or pyrotechnics being prepared. They ask the IT girls about the holiday and get answers about exchanging gifts and preparing a massive tree with a lot of light, which is also not an incorrect answer, as without the sights and sounds of the holiday season, it doesn't really feel like a big celebration. The shopping season is part of that rush, or rather a part of the stress, and it's not Christmas unless you panicked over gift giving. Even though you know it doesn't matter that much, it still feels like if you're half-assing it, then you didn't really do much. Miss Boonchoy explains that her obsession with the parade is that it's a large community event, and that by participating in it, she'll officially be recognized as a member of the community at large, that she's finally integrated into American culture and isn't just a visitor, a bit like how Sprig wanted to be treated like a Boonchoy before. On the opposite end is Mr. Boonchoy, who spends the episode looking for the perfect Christmas card photo to send home to the rest of the family, so he can show off how well they're getting along in their new home. Anne ends up saying that the holidays are about spending time with those you love, like a found family, and yet without any of those other preparations, it's just a random gathering and not something more special than that. But that's the point. There's no right way to celebrate the holiday season, nor is there a wrong way. As long as you feel like you've celebrated Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever without regret, then you understand the meaning behind the season. Escape to Amphibia. Terry has finally finished construction of the portal by realizing that the music played by the box determines the coordinates of where the portal opens up, but they still need much more power before they can make a portal large enough to enter through. During a shopping trip to get supplies for the journey, Anne begins to worry about leaving her family yet again to go back. But before they leave the store, the FBI surrounds the location and the frogs are taken into custody. The Boonchoys pursue the agent's van only to track it to a compound they can't storm alone. so they recruit the help of all their allies thus far with the plan to sneak in and rescue the Plantars, though they're caught by Mr. X and imprisoned, save for Jan and Terry, who left to steal the compound's generator. While imprisoned, Anne breaks down over the fact that she's just a kid who has the responsibility of stopping an invasion of Earth while being incapable of even telling her parents goodbye. They manage to break out when the scientists finish stealing the generator, and Anne fights her way through a bunch of FBI agents, rescuing the frogs before the rest of the group breaks in with a stolen van that they use to escape, though during the chase scene, Mr. X is still able to place a tracking device on the van. They return to the lab where Terry and the others start testing out their new power source while Anne says a proper goodbye to her parents, who admit they've been preparing for her to leave for days as well. The portal opens, though it's still too small to go through, and then the place is surrounded by FBI agents. Seeing everyone in trouble, Anne powers up again, and the power flowing from her opens the portal even larger. Seeing a giant mantis on the other side, Anne lures it across and begins attacking the gathered agents, giving Anne and the Plantars cover to leave. They finally escape back to Amphibia, only to see that the landscape is barren as Andreas's forces have razed most of the area to build his army. The major conflict facing Anne through this episode is similar to a conflict she felt back in Season 2 during the build-up to her return to Earth. Anne was afraid that she would never get the chance to see the Plantars again and felt unsure about actually going through with fixing the gems on the music box. And here, she's unsure about returning to Amphibia through a portal because it might mean not getting to spend time with her Earth family again. And all of this is made worse by the fact that once she does get separated from the Boonchoys again, she has a massive responsibility to fight off a king and potentially fight her former friends too, and she doesn't think of herself as up to the task. And Anne is right. Everything she's done so far wasn't her doing, but the actions of a large group of people supporting her. She didn't charge the gems or rediscover how to use the music box herself. She didn't make the portal. She didn't break into the FBI alone, and all of that is completely fine. Anne is trying to do everything herself despite the fact that nothing she has accomplished thus far has been done alone. She has her family to work with, she has friends to rely on, so despite the fact that she's a middle schooler trying to overthrow a king, there's a good chance she succeeds not out of her own power but by recruiting the aid of so many others to do what she can't. Anne doesn't have to be anything other than a leader, the kind to do a little bit, then inspire others with her example so they do the rest. An impossible task broken up into little pieces with each person doing a little bit. It's far more believable to manage than one person overthrowing the existing order all at once. Except all of this is still a ton of pressure to place on a child, so of course she is nervous, even if she does learn her lesson about caring for and about others. Commander Anne. After seeing the destruction of Amphibia, the Plantars return to Wartwood where they find it in ruins too, and overrun by giant creatures with mind control collars on. They're saved by Sasha, who's been living in the Plantar family tunnels, where she leads a resistance movement against Andreas. Sasha is leading this resistance as she has the Helmet of Authority, a Wartwood artifact, though she gives it to Anne as she doesn't trust herself with that power. Anne is then put in charge of leading the rebellion as it destroys the factory creating the collars, though she struggles with this leadership role because she forgets the map and orders random charges and other poorly thought out strategies. When the frogs assaulting the factory are all eaten by a giant snake, Anne forces Sasha to take back the helmet by removing it before leaping inside the snake's mouth. Sasha dons the title and begins giving orders that help them out of the snake's stomach, removing its collar before everyone works together to destroy the plant. She's about to return the helmet to Anne, but Anne insists that she can be trusted with the authority due to the fact that she was trying to give it up. Sprivy. Sprig and Ivy, the most openly lovey couple in the Resistance, are both sent on a mission to take out a guard tower so a delivery of supplies can make it through the valley to Wartwood. Sasha leads the mission, but once they get closer to the objective, the teams are chosen, with Sprig and Ivy being split up. Not wanting to spend any time apart, Sprig writes fake orders from Sasha, ordering the teams to be rearranged so they can be together, and Sprivy proceeds to practice their dancing by the guard tower while waiting for Stumpy and Fern to take out the shield generator. But Stumpy struggles to climb up the hill to get there, and Fern is unable to cut the wires powering the station without him as a distraction. When Sprig sees the two struggling, he and Ivy rush over to help them out, with Ivy distracting the crab guarding the control panel as Fern cuts it, all while Stumpy is able to test the shields down below with his fake hand while Sprig takes out reinforcements. The mission is a success and they return to Sasha, who scolds them for jeopardizing the mission to stay together before Wigbert Ribbiton shows up with weapons and the like. After repeatedly betraying the others and constantly watching out for only herself, Sasha reunites with Anne as an immediately forgiven. Anne's love of her friend, giving her, I think, like a third chance by this point, maybe a fourth. But unlike before, when Sasha saved them from the Third Temple's challenges to prove she'd reformed, here, Sasha's forgiven immediately. And while this might come across as Anne remembering that Sasha was right about Andreas, it plays more into the fact that Anne is just a forgiving person, willing to put mistakes in the past to give people the trust they need to grow as people. But Sasha isn't so forgiving of herself. She's in charge of the Wartwood Resistance, but this is only a title she's given based on her strengths. Sasha repeatedly tries to make Anne the Resistance leader because she doesn't think she deserves the title, even though she's already proven she's capable of it. Sasha's element is strength, and just like Marcy's wit was not only a test of what she knew, but the ability to admit when she didn't know something, sometimes strength is the ability to admit when you don't have the strength for a task. Anne ends up trusting Sasha not in spite of her claiming she's not a good fit, but because she's admitted to not being a good fit for leadership. That she would be willing to give up a position of power is enough to prove that she's not planning on abusing it in the future, and that proof ensures that she gets to keep it. Sasha's Angels. Sasha and Anne lead a group of frogs consisting of Wally, Miss Croaker, Loggle, Maddie, and, for some reason, Toady, in a raid against a group of marauders who have been stealing their supplies. Toady insists on being the lookout yet again, as he's fearful of getting involved in a direct fight, preferring to stay in his comfort zone. They assault the marauders' hideout only to get caught in an ambush, with only Sasha and Anne escaping, the rest imprisoned by the gang, revealed to be led by Barry, the old candy merchant. Their first escape attempt is ruined when Toady freezes up and is thrown to stop the rest. But after one of the frogs guarding them destroys a few of Toady's belongings, he snaps and starts demanding the others organize under his leadership with a more elaborate plan. Outside the camp, Anne and Sasha are training together, while Sasha tries to convince Anne not to run back in to save them, as she needs to trust her soldiers and take fewer risks. After they hear an explosion, the two girls rush inside, only to see Toady leading the escape attempt, destroying the marauders' hideout. In the end, Sasha explains that the frogs of Wartwood have spent so much time together that they know their strengths and weaknesses enough to trust one another. Olm Town Road. In spite of the recent successes of the Wartwood Resistance, they've yet to put a dent in King Andreas' plans. But Anne remembers the vase where Dr. Jan found the secret message about meeting with the Mother Olm. So they make a plan to speak with the only Olms anyone has met, the twins from Quarreler's Pass. After meeting the two-headed Olm again, Sasha's able to threaten information out of them about Proteus, the secretive city of the Olms, though as the duo has been banished, they can't enter this city. Sasha brings them along anyway, trying to give them a second chance with their homeland. Once there, they find the city has been wrecked by constant earthquakes, the result of Andreas' drilling, and they try but fail to convince the leader, Parisia, to help them out. They're kicked out again, so Lysel and Angwin take the resistance to the surface, where they try to shut down a giant drill on their own. Anne and Sasha can't figure out how to stop it, so the two-headed Olm sacrifices themselves to shut it down by force. This contraption falls into the city, where Parisia still refuses to hear them out. So Sasha yells at her, calling her an idiot and saying they'll stop Andreas on their own. Impressed by being stood up to, Parisian offers to not only take the other Olms back into Proteus, but to offer them an audience with the Mother of Olms. Sasha's redemption arc actually began while she still had ongoing betrayals in the works, rather than happening all at once. And one of the things that made her see the benefits of fixing her behavior was her interaction with Toady, a guy who constantly needed to be told what to do during Battle of the Bands. She decided to stop being so bossy of other people and to allow them to do their own thing, as she saw that Marcy and Anne had grown up without the need to be pushed around, and the fact that ordering them around so much was actually stifling their growth as individuals. So one way of proving that she's not only learned this lesson but has been implementing it is the way she treats Toady with the respect to allow him to mature on his own in his own time. With no Toadstool to boss him around, he's forced to become a stronger fighter and more of a leader, his struggle in this episode paralleling the struggles that Anne and Marcy have been facing for 2 seasons, and one Sasha finally understands. An additional struggle Sasha has been dealing with, though, comes from the fact that she still earned the forgiveness of Anne and Wart would, but doesn't feel like she deserves it. But rather than constantly trying to make things up to her friends, she instead begins to embody this forgiveness by fighting for the forgiveness of others, like trying to bring Lysel and Angwin back into the good graces of their home city. Because a person really only deserves the things that they wish for other people. Mother of Olms. Sasha and Anne meet up with the Mother of Olms alongside the Plantars, though Hop Pop is struggling with the stairs and other obstacles due to his age. Upon reaching the Mother Olm, they mention the music box, and she prepares to teach them a prophecy, only to admit that in her age she doesn't remember it. So to help her remember, the kids climb inside of her head and apply a brain ointment that ought to help, wading through earwax and getting shocked by her nervous system. When they finally make it to her brain, they find the corpse of the doctor who used to apply it, as well as a swarm of mosquito bats who chase them out. Meanwhile, Hop Pop has been complaining about his old age with the Mother of Olms, who tries to cheer him up by pointing out the knowledge that comes with age. But when the bats fly out of Mother Olm's head and Hop Pop hears the kids in trouble, he uses his horticulture knowledge to grab a few nearby plants that will force Mother Olm to sneeze the kids to safety. Once safely outside, Mother Olm prepares to remember the prophecy to no success, as the brain ointment was to expire to work. But Hop Pop points out that he writes things down if he thinks he'll forget, and they learn the prophecy was on the ceiling all along. She reads aloud a tale of 3 stars who will use their powers, those similar to Anne's, to destroy an unsleeping, unnatural thing. Grime's Pupil. In order to recruit more allies for the attack on Andreas, Sasha sends Sprig and Grime to convince Grime's sister Beatrix to join them with her toad army. But Beatrix only laughs at the idea of frogs and toads working together, challenging Grime to single combat over control of the combined armies. Grime accepts, though Beatrix gets to choose who she'll fight, and she selects Sprig. Grime has to train Sprig in combat, something the two only agree to do because Sasha ordered it. When their training starts, they get along even worse than before, as Sprig thinks he's stronger than Grime due to beating him in Newtopia, while Grime thinks Sprig just got lucky. After they fight, Sprig decides to train on his own, only to get swarmed by giant hyenas, and Grime ends up saving him as the two fight together. Grime is impressed by Sprig's speed, and Sprig is impressed by Grime's strength, and the two create a new fighting style that combines these attributes. The day of the fight arrives, and Sprig gets into an early lead, finishing off the fight with the rage he learned from Grime himself. Beatrix admits defeat and accepts that the frogs and toads can work together. The racial tensions between the toads and the frogs come to a boiling point in this episode, not merely through Beatrix and her toad army, but from Grime feuding with Sprig, each one thinking they're superior to the other, and both also being proven right. Sure, Sprig was able to defeat Grime in single combat before, but that was just once and done with an ambush. In a fair fight, Sprig might not stand a chance against a much larger opponent who knows he's coming, and this much is proven when he attempts Grime's training routine only to fail spectacularly at even the warm-up. But in the same way, Grime struggles to do the things frogs have an advantage in doing due to their smaller size, and when Sprig starts to combine the strengths of both species, he's able to create a fighting style greater than the sum of its parts. Yet what this also accomplishes is a combination of the toad and frog ideologies, not just how they fight people. Because the toads are tough and militaristic, and yet they're also very quick to trust anyone who can prove their value in a fight. Sasha was even able to get the toads to respect her after leading them in battle once, and even Beatrix changed her mind on frogs in general after a single fight with Sprig. This is in stark contrast to the frogs, who are wary and skeptical even of people who would make good allies, as Sprig refuses to learn things that would make him grow stronger due to the fact that he just doesn't like the guy who's supposed to teach him. Just like Wartwood rejected humans at first, but are now thriving under the leadership of 2. The Root of Evil. The Plantars are recruiting for the rebellion by showing off the perks of joining, though Hop Pop struggles with getting new recruits interested in the Resistance's farms. But when Bessie slides off a cliff and they wake up in a strange secret community named Gardenton, Hop is excited to see that everyone there is interested in farming, as well as very talented at it. The Plantars and Loggle are taken to meet the mayor of Gardenton, but on the way, Loggle steps on a flower and everyone begins sobbing. The mayor is revealed to be Apothecary Gary attached to Jeremy, and all the townsfolk have his spores on their heads to help them be better attuned to the needs of the plants. The Plantars try to flee to find Bessie, but are captured by the plants all coming to life. Then, they notice one of Andreas's drones attached to the back of their cart, which calls for reinforcements, and soon Gardenton is surrounded by Frobots burning everything. The Plantars are able to escape in the chaos, though Hop feels bad for the farming community and convinces them to turn back and help them fight. After the Frobots are taken care of, Hop convinces Gary that he's much better off using his mind control powers for horticulture and working with the Resistance, even offering information about the mind control collars Andreas has been using, and that they might be connected to another being like him. The Core and the King. King Andreas is talking to Darcy as they prepare to purge excess memories from their brain after explaining that the core is in charge of the body, though a few memories and habits are still leaking through. As he's waiting for the process to finish, he sees an old painting of himself and two of his close friends, Leaf and Beryl. The episode flashes back to the day Andreas was promoted to king, as his father was about to enter the core with the rest of the ancestors, receiving the key to the music box so he can continue to invade other realms to support the kingdom. But when telling this news to his friends, Leaf touches the box and receives a premonition about the destruction of the land, warning Andreas and Beryl about it, who take their concerns to Andreas's father. He ignores the warning and considers Leaf a traitor, and later on, when she steals the box from stopping it from being used for destruction, Andreas chases her down alongside Beryl, though Beryl lets her go rather than stopping her. She escapes on one of the Mossmen she controlled using the Plantar family dance, while Beryl is banished to guard the towers for not capturing her. Back in the present, Darcy's optimization is finished, and Andreas starts preparing to invade Earth as the core says they're almost proud of him. Skills and talents are not inherently good or evil traits as much as the associated tropes we see in media tend to indicate otherwise. Apothecary Gary has the ability to control minds, making him an effective villain for a Halloween-themed horror episode. And here, the show is able to make a more unnerving story involving his hive mind creations in a small, secretive town. But while Gary might be a bit evil, the mushrooms he uses are still just tools. And just as much as the way a person is might influence the way they use their tools, be it good or bad, the way a person uses their tools can also have an influence on the type of person they become. It's not just that a good guy might use hive mind powers to create very large crops and feed a bunch of people, but after feeding so many people, one might change the way they think to be a kinder person all around. In the same sense, Andreas intended to use the music box to invade because he was surrounded by people who wanted to use that tool for evil purposes. He wasn't a bad guy, he just lived in a world where that sort of violence was the default. But Leaf and Beryl recognized the end result of all this violence and attempted to stop it, and they likely would have been successful if they were allowed to stay with Andreas to convince him that the music box is a tool, not a moral. Newts in Tights. Anne and Sprig are monitoring a caravan of supplies for Andreas, only to see it stopped by the wounded orphan Gambit, ultimately being accosted by Tritonio and a new gang of tight-wearing newts. Seeing his tactics, Anne offers him a role in their rebellion, though Tritonio turns it down, saying he has no loyalties to anyone but himself. He references his childhood where he was betrayed by gangs who were also only out for themselves. During their next raid against a caravan, this is proven as Anne and Sprig take out two giant snakes serving as guards, only for the rest of the gang to be captured in a trap, and Tritonio flees into the woods rather than rescuing them. Anne tells him off for running away and argues that companionship is more valuable than mere survival before she and Sprig set out to rescue the newts in tights. They arrive at the site of a Judge Frobot, about to sentence them to death, freeing the others, though the bot transforms and overpowers them. But Tritonio saves the day as he rallies them to win the fight with Anne's help, gathering back at the camp where he agrees to work with them in the rebellion. Back in Wartwood, Hop discovers a door with the family's insignia on it and places the Plantar family tome inside to open it, only to find a small bedroom with a blank letter on the desk. Fight or flight. While on a stakeout to discover what's been eating their food supplies, Anne-Sprig and Soggy Joe find that it was Domino too, and they follow the Killamoth to its nest where they watch it get captured by Andreas's robots. Thinking the issue is resolved, Sprig and Joe are ready to go back, but Anne insists on not only rescuing her old pet, but taking in her babies so the Resistance can protect them during the mission. She and Sprig set out to find Domino too, locating her in a collar as she and other moths are being forced to power a turbine. Sprig is unsure if the moth will even recognize Anne, but after she frees Domino 2, the moth begins to cuddle with her. Before escaping, Domino 2 insists on returning for the rest of the pack, and they turn around to free them, only for these moths to fight over who gets to eat Sprig. Domino 2 screeches, and they all stop, revealing that Domino 2 was the pack leader. They fly back to the Plantar farm, where the rest of Wartwood has fallen in love with the cute larva, with Hop Pop even naming one of them Lenny Longbottom, after their old spider, and Sasha is excited to have airborne cavalry. The last few episodes of Season 3 are building to a climax, and what better way is there to sell the scale of the climax than explaining it through the context of showing what's at stake. It's not enough to just say that Andreas is going to destroy Amphibia so he can destroy the Earth, it's better to show the people whose lives he's going to upend. And this can't just be done after the threat is established, but before. The first 2 seasons felt at points as though they were just a loose collection of disconnected stories, but each of these tales were really about showing off who the characters in this world are. So Andreas is threatening not Amphibia, but the lifestyle of people like Tritonio, or Apothecary Gary. He's not only destroying the environment, but he's destroying the homes of creatures like Domino 2 and the other giant moths. Audiences tend to care about people and characters more than they care about locations or objects, so a threat against the natural resources of a planet or a vaguely similar world to ours doesn't really feel impactful unless we know a person it's hurting. The 3 Armies. The Newt and Toad armies converge on Wartwood to join the Resistance in the days leading up to Andreas's invasion. But the leaders of each of these armies struggle to work together, nearly calling off the Resistance on the spot when Tritonio, Beatrix, and Hop Pop start insulting one another. But Anne is convinced that she can mediate between the 3 groups during a strategy session, but they all come up with conflicting ideas and begin to fight even more. So she brings the 3 armies together for team-building exercises, only for each group to begin fighting in even larger numbers rather than getting along. When these arguments erupt into violence, Anne gets angry and transforms, using her blue powers to quiet the entire army before telling them off and announcing that she cannot fix their problems. She and Sasha retire to the strategy room where she apologizes for losing her temper, but the leaders of each army follow her, saying they came up with a plan together. Once somewhat reunited, Mother Olm enters, saying that Andreas was not invading in a few days, but tonight. The beginning of the end. The Wartwood Resistance has adopted a strategy from a different movie that Marcy always made the other girls watch at sleepovers, where the main army serves as a distraction for a smaller force to sneak in. This smaller force consists of Sasha, Anne, Grime, and the Plantars, who fly in on Domino 2 and Joe Sparrow to enter the castle, rescue Marcy, and retrieve the music box. They're stopped by Eunan and Olivia, controlled by Andreas's collars, though they use their coordination to fight them off and free the 2, who then warn that Marcy is different than who she was before. This is confirmed immediately when the music box is revealed as a fake, and Darcy traps them, saying she knew they would try a strategy from her favorite movie. With the Resistance's leaders captured, Darcy presents them to the rebellion, and tells them to abandon their cause and retreat. Darcy prepares to kill Anne so the last gem's power will return to the box, but Anne buys time by asking if she's certain that would work. This convinces Darcy to delay her execution to perform a dissection first, but before all of that, she orders Andreas to open the portal to Earth. The episode ends on swarms of Andreas's robots pouring into the skies of LA. There are hundreds of years of animosity between the newts, toads, and frogs in Amphibia, and an afternoon of team-building exercises isn't going to be enough to make people put that amount of casual hatred behind them. As much as each army is aware that they have a common enemy, the most beneficial action of ignoring the grudges they've been holding on to is still difficult, not only because of what each thinks individually, but because they're unsure if the others are also willing to put the grudge behind them. It's hard to trust a person who you know has reason not to trust you, but everyone there has a reason to trust Anne, as she's consistently shown that she's deserving of this trust, in the fact that she keeps putting other people's interests ahead of her own. Each of the three armies owes her something, and so it makes sense that Anne would think she was the right person for the job of reuniting these races on good terms once again. But she fails to do this, as it's impossible for one person to do that. And this is the exact thing that Anne was worried about before coming back to Amphibia, that she's not strong enough to save the day. She's right, too. She can't. But everybody else can, and so this is how they're going to beat Andreas, not relying on one person, but each other. In this same way, they can't undo the centuries of hatred in the past, but they can at least work together to start adding better memories to the future. It won't erase the trauma, but together the Wartwood resistance might be able to at least stop defining the present by it. All in, and the hardest thing. The episode opens on a flashback to St. James Middle School, where Sasha, Marcy, and Anne are sent to the principal's office for a prank involving K-pop and puppies. The first two girls are given an easy time, with the principal impressed by their technical abilities, while lamenting they don't direct their energy to something more serious. But Anne is given an essay to write about who she is, due to having intellect and talent, but only using it in service of other people's ideas. Back in the present, Andreas has begun his invasion of Earth as... You know what? These episode recaps serve two purposes. For people who have already seen the show to be quickly reminded of the events of the episode by seeing my take on the story, and for people who haven't seen the show to understand what I'm referencing in my analysis section following the recap. This episode and the next one make up a two-part finale of Amphibia, and so I assume that basically everyone who has seen the show is deeply familiar with the plot, and those who haven't, well, maybe watch it yourself. I know it's not good policy for a YouTuber to tell people to stop watching their channel and to do something else, and that statistically a lot of people who do leave are not going to make their way back. But I stand by my decision to sabotage my own watch statistics for the last few minutes of this video, in the interest of making a better end product. Anyway, on to the next section. The two major antagonists of this episode are Darcy and Andreas, working together to coordinate the invasion of Earth. Both of these antagonists are defeated in the same way, by appealing to some inner sense of humanity within them. Darcy was defeated by trying to reach out to Marcy, while Andreas was defeated by reaching out to Andreas. It wasn't any of the girls who were able to reach Marcy though, but Marcy herself, realizing that the ideal version of life she was offered by the core wasn't real, and that she needed to accept the negative parts of life just as much as the positive ones. Marcy originally came to Amphibia to stop her parents from moving away, so she could spend more time with her friends forever. But that's not something that's possible to do even with the music box and another world, because people constantly change and mature, becoming different as time goes on. In the same way, her relationship with her friends will change no matter what. Her leaving them was just another way of making that change happen, even though it wasn't ideal. But examining that relationship in the first place is what finally causes her to snap out of the trap laid by the core. She was offered a perfect version of her friends in the core who would agree with everything she said, but her real friends fought with her and disagreed and could even be bossy at times. Just like the people of Wart would accepted Anne, warts and all, to really be someone's friend is to accept all of them, and realizing that the core only wanted her for her brain and not her memories of her life before Amphibia is what caused Marcy to realize a true friend likes all of their friend. Andreas, on the other hand, is defeated by appealing to Andreas, what he wanted to do instead of what the core wanted him to do. His entire life after taking the crown has not been his own to live, as he's really only acting out the will of a hive mind, hoping to win its approval. This story is familiar to us because it's the same thing that Anne has spent years of her life doing, going along with what other people want her to do in an attempt to win approval, whether it was stealing a music box for her friends or something with more weight behind it. Because Andreas was the same way, Anne was able to connect with him to point out that the current way he was living was wrong, though with nothing left to fall back on, this revelation alone did very little. It's Leaf's letter to him that reminded him of older days, when he still had something worth living for, and ideas of his own that finally woke him up to what he ought to be doing, not prolonging a conflict that exists purely to prolong itself, but to act of his own accord. He may have been possessed by the core to keep fighting anyway, but his final act in the series is to give up what he's been fighting for thousands of years in an attempt to undo some of the damage. The fact that one of Leaf's descendants was the one to make this connection at last is just a way of bringing his arc full circle, and we know that these descendants were the right ones for the task because they didn't just keep her new name, but her old traditions like the Plantar family dance. This dance also helped to wrap up some of the trauma that the Plantar family's been keeping separate from their relationship to Leaf, as the Herons who attacked the Toad Tower were the same ones who killed Sprig and Polly's parent, and were the same ones unleashed on Los Angeles later. That Sprig and Polly were able to defeat these birds not by killing them in retaliation, but freeing them from Andreas's collars, then taming them to work on the same side. The Herons did not have collars when they attacked Wart all those years ago, so it's the same bird brain at the end of the episode as it was back then, but simply getting revenge over and over is far worse than converting an enemy to an ally in terms of net gain. The trauma is healed by controlling it, not ignoring it, and one thing that Sprig and Anne can no longer ignore is the fact that Anne's journey is done. For a moment, it seemed like they'd be stuck in Amphibia forever, as they were told there was only enough power in the gyms to fight off the collapsing moon or go home. And they didn't hesitate to fight, even though they had worked so hard to get home in the first place. It mirrors Sasha's motivations from the first season especially, as she was originally planning on letting the Toads invade with her strength to get back home, not caring what happens to the world she wanted to abandon anyway. But the girls have all changed, and just as Marcy couldn't go back to the way things used to be and stay that way forever, Sprig eventually had to accept that sometimes people changing means people leaving. After a time skip, Sasha mentioned that even after all the adventures they had together in Amphibia, they still drifted apart. So for Sprig to accept that his surrogate sister is going to change, he has to accept that she's going to leave him eventually, and then take the parts of him that have changed as a result and make the best of it. He becomes an adventurer alongside Ivy, and he works on collecting the memories of her adventures too. It helps that he saw a perfect example of this through the person he was about to lose. After months of not being able to see her friends, Anne reunites with them, and immediately goes back to being happy with the others, their love persisting over all that time. So this made it easier for Sprig to say goodbye, because he got to see that what he felt for his sister wouldn't fade out over time as long as he refused to let it fade. Taking the impact that a person has had on you and using it to change who you are is a big part of moving on in life. Even after something good comes to an end, like a relationship, you can still find positives by embodying them yourself. Andreas is able to tell off the core at the end of the show by quoting Anne's exact words to Sasha at the end of the Season 1 finale, "Standing up to you." And even Anne herself is able to inspire so many other people while still admitting that she has personal growth to see herself undergo. She rejects an offer of selfishly using unlimited power from the gyms so that she can save others instead. Then later she rejects an offer from the Cosmic Guardian so that she can reincarnate. Because to accept that offer would mean to die, and thus to stagnate as the person she currently was. I think it's pretty fitting that after a meeting with a literal deity, Anne would go back to Earth and become a museum employee, teaching intrigued students, since what better way is there to continue embodying the effect she had on other people? Even after all the adventures and changes Anne underwent, she was still able to move on, though not completely, because she still got to be the Frog Lady. So, that was Amphibia. My first time watching it and first time making a retrospective out of it. I'm sure I ended up repeating myself quite a bit, and I'm sure that I probably missed a few obvious things, as well as a lot of foreshadowing that will make more sense on a second watch through. There were probably also a few things that I thought were too minor to mention and didn't, only for these details to end up returning in a huge way. Right off the top of my head, I can think of a few moments where I noticed that the moon in the sky had stars in front of it and thought like, hey, that's not how moons work, the stars shouldn't be in front. And now I know those weren't stars. Now all I need to know for a second watch through would be the behind-the-scenes stuff, interviews and AMAs and other bits of information revealed by the creators behind the show as they explain not only their process and intentions, but also key things for, like, what was censored and what affordances were made for the network. Was Andreas always going to use an energy sword, or did they change that so they could show Marcy getting stabbed in the Season 2 finale? Was some of the tone intentional, or was that there to appease old-fashioned network executives, like Marcy getting stabbed and then not 2 minutes later, Anne does a moe face over finally having Wi-Fi again? I'm sure the hardcore fans of the show who have made it all the way to the end will have plenty to say about what I missed by not looking at anything behind the scenes, and I know that as soon as I finish writing this, I'll probably be trying to find forum posts and the like to fill in any obvious gaps in my knowledge. Thankfully, like I stated at the start of the video, this was my blind analysis of Amphibia, so I'm allowed to miss details because that's what makes it more personal, right? Anyway, if you have this video on in the background while doing something else like folding laundry or cooking, here is your warning to start looking for another video to watch. I'd recommend one of my own, but I am of course extremely biased in this regard. If you've got something like Amphibia you'd think I would enjoy not only watching but writing about, be sure to recommend that in the comments. This is basically the only way that I get shows recommended to me anymore these days. I'd like to do a like, comment, subscribe spiel, but I'm certain you know what those buttons do, so I'm not going to explain them to you again. Anyway, I don't have a sort of pre-planned thesis to call back to, so, ribbit.